Blood hit the concrete before Ethan Cole understood what happened. Wolf's fist had already connected twice. His ribs cracked, his vision blurred. 95 Hell's Angels surrounded his garage engines, still hot chains already swinging. "You touched my daughter!" Wolf growled, lifting Ethan by the throat. "You put your hands on my little girl." Ethan couldn't breathe, couldn't explain. 14 hours ago, he'd done the unforgivable. He'd touched a biker's disabled daughter without permission. He'd adjusted her wheelchair while her father slept. He'd crossed every line that existed. Now he was going to die for it, unless the girl in the wheelchair could stop her father in time. Before we continue, if you love stories about everyday heroes who risk everything to do what's right, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Stay with me until the very end and comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's find out how a broke mechanic ended up seconds away from death and why what he did might just be a miracle. The first punch came without warning. Ethan's head snapped back. Blood filled his mouth. He staggered but didn't fall. Couldn't fall. Falling meant dying. "That's for touching her," Wolf said. The second punch caught Ethan in the ribs. Something cracked. He gasped, doubled over, tasted copper and fear. "That's for not asking." Wolf grabbed Ethan's shirt, lifted him off his feet like he weighed nothing. Their faces were inches apart. Ethan could see every line of fury carved into the bigger man's features. "And this," Wolf whispered, "this is for making her cry." Ethan closed his eyes, waited for the killing blow. It never came. "Daddy, stop." Grace's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Wolf froze, his fist hung in the air, trembling with restrained violence. "Put him down," Grace said. "Now." "Baby girl, you don't understand what I understand better than you do. Put him down." Wolf's grip loosened. Ethan dropped to his knees, coughing blood onto the concrete floor of his own garage. Around him, 94 bikers watched in absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Grace rolled forward in her wheelchair. The same wheelchair Ethan had spent all night modifying. She stopped between her father and the bleeding mechanic, creating a barrier with her own body. "He didn't hurt me," she said quietly. "He saved me." Wolf's face twisted with confusion. "What are you talking about? He touched you without—" "He fixed me, Daddy." Grace's voice cracked. "For 2 years I've been in pain. Every single day, every single minute. And nobody noticed. Not you, not the doctors, not the specialists you paid $50,000 to examine me. Nobody." She looked down at Ethan, who was still on his knees, blood dripping from his split lip. "Except him." 14 hours earlier, Ethan Cole had no idea his life was about to change. He woke up at 5:47 a.m., same as always. Bad leg throbbing, same as always. Bank account empty, same as always. He'd learned to live with disappointment the way other people lived with breathing. The coffee maker was broken. Had been broken for 3 weeks. He couldn't afford to fix it, which was ironic for a mechanic, but replacement parts cost money, and money was something Ethan hadn't seen in a while. He drank tap water instead and called it breakfast. His garage sat on the forgotten edge of Tucson, Arizona, where the desert crept close and dreams went to die. The sign out front read, "Cole's Auto Repair. We fix what others can't." The paint was peeling. The promise felt hollow. But Ethan opened the bay door anyway, same as every morning. Because giving up meant the IED won. Meant the Army doctors who said he'd never work again were right. Meant his ex-wife's parting words, "You're not broken, Ethan, you're just empty," were true. He refused to let them be true. The first customer arrived at 7:15 a.m. Martha Chen, 76 years old, driving a Honda Civic older than some of Ethan's tools. Her brakes were grinding. She knew it. He knew it. The question was whether she could afford to fix them. "How bad?" Martha asked, wringing her hands. Ethan slid under the car, checked the pads, checked the rotors. "Bad, real bad. Another week and she'd have no brakes at all." "Couple $100, he said, sliding back out. "Parts and labor." Martha's face fell. I don't have that much. Social Security doesn't come until next week, and my grandson needs $50. She blinked. "What? $50 covers the parts. I'll throw in the labor for free." Mr. Cole, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, I offered. Ethan was already reaching for his tools. Go sit in the office. There's water in the mini fridge. This'll take about an hour. Martha started crying. Ethan pretended not to notice. He'd learned that kindness embarrassed people, so he tried to deliver it quickly and without eye contact. The work was simple, familiar. Brake pads were brake pads, whether they were on a grandmother's Civic or a military Humvee in Kandahar. The muscle memory was the same. The satisfaction was the same. For 1 hour, Ethan forgot he was failing. Then the rumble started. He heard it before he saw anything, a low vibration that built and built until the windows rattled. Ethan knew that sound. Every veteran knew that sound. It was the sound of something big coming, something that changed everything in its path. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside. The Harley that rolled into his parking lot was worth more than his entire garage. Custom build, chrome so polished it looked wet, engine tuned to mechanical perfection. The man who climbed off it was worth even more. To the wrong people, anyway. 6'4", broad enough to block the sun. Leather cut with patches that told a story Ethan didn't want to read. The biggest patch said, Hell's Angels. The rocker underneath said, Vice President. Ethan's survival instinct screamed at him to go back inside, lock the door, pretend he wasn't home. But his feet stayed rooted to the cracked asphalt. The biker removed his sunglasses. His eyes were the color of gunmetal and just as warm. You, Cole. Depends who's asking. Name's Wolf. I need a mechanic. There's a dealer in Phoenix, probably better equipped for a bike like that. Dealer's 3 hours away. You're 3 minutes. Wolf crossed his arms. Someone told me you're the best, said you could hear problems before they happen. That true? Ethan hesitated. His reputation had followed him from the Army, passed along through veteran networks like a secret handshake. He'd helped a lot of soldiers over the years. Apparently one of them knew this man. Who told you that? Does it matter? It might. Wolf's expression flickered. Something that might have been respect or might have been annoyance. Hard to tell with men like him. Kid named Rodriguez, Danny Rodriguez, said you saved his life in Afghanistan by catching a brake line failure nobody else saw. Said if I ever needed a mechanic, I could trust you were the only name worth knowing. Danny Rodriguez. Ethan remembered him. Young private, barely 20, scared out of his mind every time he climbed into a vehicle. Ethan had checked his Humvee personally before every mission just to give the kid peace of mind. Danny had made it home. That was more than a lot of them could say. What's wrong with the bike? Ethan asked. Vibration in the rear. Started yesterday, getting worse. Bring it in. Wolf rolled the Harley into the garage, and for the next hour, Ethan forgot about everything else. The bike was a puzzle, and puzzles had solutions. He just had to find the right pieces. He found it in 43 minutes. Hairline crack in your swing arm bearing, Ethan said, pointing to a spot invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Another 100 miles and this would have failed completely. At highway speed, you'd have lost control of the rear wheel. Wolf leaned in, squinting. I don't see anything. Most people don't. That's why they die. A long pause. Wolf straightened up, studied Ethan with new eyes. How much? Parts about $60. Labor's another 40. Call it an even 100. That's it. That's it. Wolf reached into his pocket, pulled out a roll of bills that made Ethan's throat tighten, peeled off 5 20s like they were nothing, then added 5 more. Keep the change. That's too much. Take it anyway. Wolf's voice left no room for argument. You just saved my life. $100 seems cheap. Ethan took the money. His hands were steadier than they should have been, given the circumstances. $200. That was groceries for a month. That was keeping the lights on for another few weeks. That was survival. Thank you, he said quietly. Wolf nodded once, then pulled out his phone. Made a call, spoke too softly for Ethan to hear. When he hung up, his expression had changed. Something heavier now, something worried. I need another favor, Wolf said. What kind? My daughter. She's got a wheelchair. Motorized. Expensive as hell. It's been acting up for months. We've taken it to specialists all over the state. Nobody can figure out what's wrong. I'm not a wheelchair technician. You're a mechanic who sees what others miss. That's what I need. Ethan hesitated. Wheelchairs were different from bikes, different systems, different stakes. If he screwed something up on a motorcycle, the rider got hurt. If he screwed something up on a wheelchair, a disabled person got trapped. What's wrong with it? He asked carefully. That's the problem. Nobody knows. The electronics check out, the motors check out, everything checks out. But it doesn't work right. Random stops, jerky movements. My daughter says it hurts her, but the specialists say that's impossible. And you believe her? Wolf's jaw tightened. She's my daughter. Of course I believe her. Then why haven't the specialists fixed it? Because they're not listening to her. They're listening to their machines. Wolf stepped closer and Ethan resisted the urge to step back. I'm asking you to listen to her, really listen. Can you do that? Ethan thought about Danny Rodriguez, about all the soldiers whose lives had depended on his ability to see what others missed, about the promise he'd made when that IED ended his career that he'd find another way to matter. Bring her in, he said. I'll take a look. The van arrived 2 hours later. Ethan heard it before he saw it, a heavy engine moving slowly accompanied by the rumble of multiple motorcycles. He stepped outside and watched as a small convoy pulled into his lot. The van in the center, 4 bikes flanking it like an honor guard. The van's side door opened, a mechanical lift descended, and Grace Hawkins rolled out. She was 17 years old with light brown hair and eyes the color of sea glass. Pretty in a fragile way, but it was her expression that caught Ethan's attention. Blank, hollow. The look of someone who had stopped expecting good things to happen. He'd seen that look before, on soldiers who'd lost too many friends, on veterans who'd given up on civilian life, on his own face some mornings when the mirror was too honest. The wheelchair itself was impressive. Titanium frame, computer-controlled movement, custom everything. It probably cost more than Ethan's garage, but something was wrong. He couldn't see it yet, couldn't name it, but his instincts were screaming the same way they'd screamed in Afghanistan right before everything went to hell. Wolf climbed out of one of the escort bikes, removed his helmet, walked over to stand beside his daughter. The other bikers stayed mounted engines idling, watching Ethan with expressions that made it clear exactly what would happen if he made a wrong move. Grace, Wolf said gently, "This is Ethan Cole. He's the mechanic I told you about. He's going to look at your chair." Grace barely glanced at Ethan. Another one. This one's different. They're all different until they're not. Her voice was flat, exhausted. Let me guess, you'll run diagnostics. Everything will check out. You'll tell Dad the chair is fine and I need to adjust my expectations. Then we'll leave and nothing will change. Ethan didn't respond. He was watching her too carefully to speak, watching the way she sat, the way she breathed. The tiny micro-expressions that flickered across her face when she thought no one was looking. Pain. She was in pain, not dramatic, obvious pain. The quiet kind. The kind you learned to live with because nobody believed it existed. The kind that ate away at you day by day until you forgot what normal felt like. How long? Ethan asked. Grace looked at him for the first time. Really looked. How long what? How long have you been hurting? Something shifted in her eyes. Surprise, suspicion, a tiny flicker of hope she was trying to smother. 2 years, she said quietly, since the accident. Wolf flinched. Ethan filed that away for later. What accident? Car crash. I was 15. My mom... Grace's voice caught. My mom didn't make it. I did, sort of. Your spine, spinal muscular atrophy. The crash triggered it or accelerated it. Doctors aren't sure. She gestured at her legs. Either way, this is permanent. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't help. You're right. It doesn't. Ethan crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. So let's skip the sorry and get to the helping. Tell me about the pain. Where is it? When does it happen? What makes it better? What makes it worse? Grace stared at him. You actually want to know. I actually want to know. The specialist never asked. I'm not them. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Ethan waited. Patience was something the army had beaten into him. Sometimes literally. Then Grace started talking. It's in my lower back mostly, but also my shoulders and the base of my skull. It's worst when I'm in the chair for more than an hour. The pain starts small and builds until I can barely think. I've tried telling the doctors, but they keep saying the chair is perfectly calibrated, that the problem must be in my head. Is it in your head? No. Her voice hardened. The pain is real. I know the difference between imaginary and real. I'm not crazy. I didn't say you were. Ethan stood up slowly. His bad leg protested, but he ignored it. Can I look at the chair with you in it? Grace hesitated, glanced at her father. Wolf nodded once. Okay, she said, but you're not going to find anything. Nobody ever does. Ethan spent the next hour examining the wheelchair. He checked the electronics. Perfect. He checked the motors. Flawless. He checked the programming, the sensors, the control systems. Everything was exactly as the specifications said it should be. The specialists were right. There was nothing wrong with the chair. And yet, Ethan stepped back, rubbed his jaw, thought about everything Grace had told him. Lower back, shoulders, base of skull, pain that built over time. Pain nobody believed. He closed his eyes and remembered Afghanistan. There was a kid in his unit, Private Torres, who kept complaining about his Humvee. Said something felt wrong. The other mechanics checked it out, found nothing, told Torres he was imagining things. Torres kept complaining. They kept dismissing him. Then one day, Ethan decided to actually ride in Torres's Humvee. Not just look at it. Ride in it. Feel what Torres felt. 3 miles into the patrol, he understood. The seat was mounted wrong. Not by much, just a few millimeters off the spec. But those millimeters created a vibration that traveled up through the spine and settled at the base of the skull. Over time, that vibration caused headaches, nausea, and concentration problems. Nothing was wrong with the Humvee. Everything was wrong with how it fit the driver. Ethan opened his eyes. I need to see you use it, he said to Grace. What? The chair. I need to see you move around in it. Not just sit there, actually use it. Grace frowned but complied. She moved forward, backward, turned left, turned right. The chair responded perfectly. Smoothly, exactly as it was designed to do. But Ethan wasn't watching the chair anymore. He was watching Grace, her shoulders. They kept trying to roll forward, fighting against the backrest. Her neck, it tilted at an angle that couldn't possibly be comfortable. Her hands on the joystick, reaching just a little too far, straining muscles that shouldn't have to strain. And her face, every time she moved, a tiny grimace she probably wasn't even aware of anymore. Stop, Ethan said. Grace stopped. Who set up this chair for you? The manufacturer. Their technicians came out and calibrated everything. Did they measure you first? Measure me. Your body, your spine length, your arm reach, your sitting height. Did they take measurements before they set up the chair? Grace thought about it. I don't think so. They asked about my weight and height. That's it. Ethan felt his heart rate increase. He was on to something. He could feel it. This chair was built for someone, he said slowly, but I don't think it was built for you. Not specifically, not precisely. They used generic specifications instead of your actual body. Wolf stepped forward. What are you saying? I'm saying the chair works perfectly for an average adult male with standard proportions. But your daughter isn't an average adult male. She's a 17-year-old girl with her own unique body, her own unique muscle patterns, her own unique needs. And nobody bothered to account for that. That's impossible, Wolf said. We paid $40,000 for that chair. They said it was custom fitted. Custom fitted to what? To her actual measurements or to whatever data they had in their system? Ethan shook his head. I've seen this before. Not with wheelchairs, with military vehicles. Seats designed for the average soldier that don't actually fit any real soldier. The specs say everything is correct. The equipment works exactly as designed. But the human being inside is suffering because nobody asked the right questions. Grace was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. You believe me, she said. You actually believe me. I believe what I see. And I see a young woman who's been in pain for 2 years because everyone was looking at the machine instead of the person. Can you fix it? Ethan hesitated. This was the moment where he had to decide how far he was willing to go, how much he was willing to risk. He looked at Wolf, at the 4 bikers still watching from their motorcycles, at the Hells Angels patches that represented a code he didn't fully understand, and a brotherhood he would never be part of. Then he looked at Grace, at the pain she was trying so hard to hide, at the hope she was trying so hard not to feel. "I can try," he said, "but I need to do something first. Something that might make your father uncomfortable." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "What?" "I need to touch her, physically examine how she sits in that chair, measure her spine alignment, check her pressure points, see where her body meets the equipment and where the equipment is failing her." "Absolutely not." "Daddy, no." Wolf's voice was iron. "Nobody touches my daughter, not without my direct supervision. Not without me standing right there watching every single—" "Then stand right there," Ethan interrupted. "Watch every single move I make. I'm not asking for privacy. I'm asking for permission to do what nobody else has done. To actually look at your daughter as a person instead of a patient file." Wolf and Ethan stared at each other. The tension in the garage was thick enough to cut. "Please," Grace said softly. "Daddy, please. If there's even a chance." Wolf's jaw worked. His hands clenched and unclenched. Every instinct he had was probably screaming at him to grab his daughter and leave, to never let this stranger near her again. But he looked at Grace, at the hope in her eyes, and something in him broke. "Fine," he said, "but I'm watching. You make one wrong move, you look at her wrong, you breathe wrong." "I understand." "I don't think you do." Wolf stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only Ethan could hear. "That girl is my entire world. Her mother died in that accident. Grace is all I have left. If you hurt her, if you disappoint her, I will end you. Not quickly, not cleanly. Do you understand?" Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "I spent 8 years keeping soldiers alive in Afghanistan. Every vehicle I worked on, every system I checked, that was someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's entire world. I treated them all like my own life depended on it, because it did. I'll treat your daughter the same way." A long moment passed, then Wolf stepped back. "Do what you need to do." The examination took 45 minutes. Ethan worked carefully, methodically, explaining everything he was doing before he did it. Grace was tense at first, unused to someone actually touching her, actually treating her body as something worth understanding. But gradually she relaxed. And gradually, Ethan built a picture of what had gone wrong. The seat angle was off by 3 degrees. 3 degrees, such a small number. But in a chair someone sat in for 10 hours a day, 3 degrees was everything. It meant constant pressure on the lower spine, constant compensation by the muscles, constant pain that nobody could see because the equipment was technically correct. The headrest was positioned for someone 2 inches taller. That meant Grace's neck was always slightly extended, always fighting for a neutral position, always losing. The armrests were too high, not by much, maybe half an inch. But that half inch meant her shoulders had to stay elevated, had to carry tension. They were never meant to carry. And the joystick, the damn joystick. It was placed exactly where the specifications said it should be placed, which was exactly the wrong place for Grace's specific arm length in motor control patterns. Nobody had done anything wrong, and nobody had done anything right. "I can fix this," Ethan said quietly after he'd finished his measurements. Grace looked at him. "How? It's not complicated. New seat angle, adjusted headrest, lowered armrests, repositioned joystick. The parts are the same. The electronics are the same. All I'm changing is the geometry, the way your body meets the machine." The specialists said there was nothing wrong with the geometry. The specialists were measuring the chair against specifications. "I'm measuring the chair against you." Ethan paused. "There's a difference." Wolf had been silent throughout the examination, watching every move Ethan made with hawk-like intensity. Now he spoke. "How long? If I work through the night, should be done by morning." "And you're sure this will help?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep, but he also didn't want to undersell what he'd found. "I'm sure something is wrong," he said carefully. "I'm sure the current setup is causing pain. I'm sure my adjustments will change how she interfaces with the chair. What I can't guarantee is that it will solve everything. Bodies are complicated. Pain is complicated. Sometimes fixes take time." Wolf nodded slowly, then he looked at his daughter. "What do you want to do, baby girl?" Grace didn't hesitate. Let him try. The Shabem. Wolf left at midnight. He didn't want to, that much was obvious. But Grace insisted. She told him to go home, get some rest, come back in the morning. She told him she'd be fine. She told him Ethan wouldn't try anything. Wolf looked at Ethan with an expression that promised unspeakable violence if any of those statements proved false. Then he kissed his daughter's forehead and walked out. 2 hours later, Grace was asleep on the makeshift bed Ethan had set up in his office, just an old couch with some blankets. But she was exhausted and fell asleep almost instantly. Ethan worked. He worked the way he used to work in Afghanistan, when lives depended on getting it right and time was always running out. He measured twice, cut once, adjusted and readjusted, tested every modification against the measurements he'd taken against the picture he'd built in his mind of Grace's body and Grace's needs. At 3 a.m., his bad leg gave out. He collapsed against his workbench, gasping, fighting the pain that shot up through his knee and into his hip. The shrapnel the doctors had left behind, too dangerous to remove, they'd said was grinding against bone. He could feel it, could feel every ragged edge. He thought about quitting, thought about lying down, thought about telling Wolf in the morning that he'd tried but couldn't finish. Then he thought about Grace's face, about the pain she was trying to hide, about the hope she was trying not to feel. He grabbed the workbench, pulled himself up, and kept working. By 5 a.m., he was finished. The modifications weren't elegant, they weren't pretty, but they were precise. Every angle, every position, every point of contact between chair and body, all adjusted to match Grace's actual measurements instead of some engineer's idea of what she should be. Ethan stood back and looked at his work. Then he looked at his hands. They were shaking, from exhaustion, from pain, from something else he couldn't name. He'd done everything he could. Now came the hard part. Grace woke at 5:47 a.m. She came out of the office, slowly rubbing her eyes, still half asleep. Then she saw Ethan standing beside her wheelchair, and something in her expression changed. "You actually did it," she said. "You stayed up all night." "Told you I would." Grace rolled toward the chair in the backup wheelchair. They'd brought a basic model that worked but didn't fit her any better than the expensive one had. "It doesn't look different," she said, examining the modified chair. "It's not supposed to look different. It's supposed to feel different." Ethan took a breath. "Ready." Grace hesitated. For a moment she looked young, younger than 17, scared and hopeful, and trying so hard not to be either. "What if it doesn't work?" "Then we'll try something else." "What if nothing works?" Ethan crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. His bad legs screamed in protest. He ignored it. "Grace, I'm not going to lie to you. I can't guarantee this will fix everything. I can't guarantee the pain will go away completely. But I can guarantee one thing." "What?" "I see you, not the chair, not the disease, not the patient file, you. And I'm going to keep trying until something into our sore until you tell me to stop." Grace stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Okay." She transferred into the modified chair, sat down, adjusted her position, and froze. Ethan's heart stopped. "Grace," she didn't respond. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were gripping the armrests. Her whole body was trembling. "Grace, talk to me. What's wrong? What are you feeling?" And she opened her eyes. They were full of tears. "Nothing," she whispered. "What? I feel nothing. No pain. For the first time in 2 years, I'm sitting in this chair and I feel nothing." The tears spilled over. How did you?" Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "I listened," he said simply. "I just listened." Grace moved the chair forward, backward, turned left, turned right. Each movement was smooth, natural, perfect. And then she did something Ethan hadn't expected. She laughed, a real laugh, full and bright and surprised. The laugh of someone who had forgotten what joy felt like and was just remembering. She spun the chair in a circle, moving faster than the chair had ever moved for her before. She raced across the garage floor, testing her limits, finding new ones. "Oh my God," she said. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." Ethan smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled in months. Then the garage door exploded, not literally, but the sound that filled the space was like an explosion, like thunder and war and judgment all rolled into one. Wolf was back, and he wasn't alone. Ethan didn't count the motorcycles this time. He didn't need to. 95. The entire Arizona chapter, every single member who could ride had ridden, and they were all looking at him like he was already dead. Wolf dismounted first. His face was a mask of fury. He stalked toward the garage, toward Ethan, with the deliberate movements of a predator closing in for the kill. "Grace," he shouted. "Grace, you okay? Did he hurt you? Did he? Daddy, stop!" Grace rolled forward, positioning herself between her father and Ethan. Again, just like she would hours later when Wolf's fist was already swinging. But this time was different. This time she was smiling. "Daddy, look at me." Wolf stopped, looked, really looked. And Wolf saw what Ethan had seen. The smoothness of her movement, the ease of her posture, the absence of those tiny grimaces that had become so constant he'd stopped noticing them. "How do you feel, baby girl?" Wolf asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. "I feel," Grace paused, searched for the right word. "I feel free." Wolf looked at Ethan, then at Grace, then at Ethan again. "What did you do?" "I fixed what was broken." But the specialists said the specialists were wrong. Ethan met Wolf's gaze directly. They looked at the machine. "I looked at your daughter. There's a difference." Behind Wolf, 94 bikers sat in silence, waiting, watching, ready to follow whatever order their vice president gave. Wolf took a step toward Ethan, then another. Ethan didn't back away, didn't flinch. He'd already decided somewhere in those long hours of the night that he'd accept whatever consequences came. He'd done the right thing. Whatever happened next, at least he'd done the right thing. Wolf stopped inches away. His breath was hot on Ethan's face. His fists were clenched at his sides. "You touched my daughter," Wolf said quietly, "without my permission, while I was gone, in the middle of the night. Yes, but you broke my rules, my explicit direct rules. Yes, you could have waited, could have asked, could have done this with me watching. I could have, but Grace was in pain, and I could make it stop." Wolf's jaw worked. His eyes were bright with something Ethan couldn't identify. "Do you have any idea," Wolf said slowly, "how many people have promised to help my daughter? How many doctors and specialists and therapists have sworn they could fix her? How many times I've watched her get her hopes up only to have them crushed?" "I can imagine." "No, you can't." Wolf shook his head. "Her mother died in that accident. Did you know that Grace was in the car? She watched her mother die. And then she woke up in a hospital and they told her she'd never walk again. Told her she'd spend the rest of her life in a chair. Told her she was lucky to be alive. She told me." "Did she tell you what happened?" "After the depression, the therapy, the wheelchair that was supposed to give her freedom, but only gave her more pain. Did she tell you about the night she cried herself to sleep because nobody believed her? Because everyone kept saying the equipment was fine and the problem was in her head?" Ethan's throat tightened. "No, she didn't tell me that." "Of course she didn't, because she stopped telling people, stopped expecting them to listen, stopped believing anyone would ever actually help." Wolf leaned closer. "And then you came along, a broke mechanic with a bum leg and a dying business. And in one night you did what $50,000 couldn't do. You gave my daughter her hope back." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Wolf stepped back, turned to face his brothers. 94 men on 94 motorcycles, all waiting for his word. "This man broke my rules," Wolf said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "He touched my daughter without permission. By our code, he should answer for that." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chains clinked, leather creaked. "But our code also says something else." Wolf paused. "It says we protect those who can't protect themselves. It says we honor those who sacrifice for others. It says we recognize courage even when it comes from outside our brotherhood." He turned back to Ethan. "I came here ready to hurt you, maybe kill you. I made that call last night, told every brother to meet me at dawn because I thought you'd violated my daughter in some way. I didn't. I know." Wolf raised a hand. "I know you didn't. I know now. Because I looked at Grace's face this morning and for the first time in 2 years, I saw my little girl. The real one. The one who laughs and dreams and believes in tomorrow." He dropped to one knee. Behind him, 94 men went silent. Absolutely, completely silent. I was wrong, Wolf said. I threatened you. I warned you away from my daughter like you were some kind of danger. But you're not a danger, you're a miracle. I'm just a mechanic. No, Wolf shook his head. You're what this world needs more of. Someone who sees people instead of problems. Someone who listens when nobody else will. Someone who risks everything to do what's right, even when it might cost them everything. He rose to his feet. I owe you a debt I can never repay, but I'm going to try. Whatever you need, money, protection, resources, you name it, it's yours. Ethan thought about his empty bank account, his failing business, his stack of unpaid bills and final notices. Then he thought about why he'd become a mechanic in the first place. I don't want money, he said. I don't want protection. I just want to help people. Wolf smiled. It transformed his face, made him look almost human. Then let us help you help people. He gestured at the 94 men behind him. We've got resources, connections, manpower. We know veterans all across this state, disabled men and women who got chewed up by the system and spit out with equipment that doesn't work. We can find them. We can bring them to you. We can give you what you need to help more people than you ever could alone. Ethan looked at the army of bikers, at the chrome and leather and patches that represented a world he'd never understood. Why, Omasom, he asked. Why would you do this? Because you saved my daughter. Wolf put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. And because in this world, the people who actually help are rarer than you think. Most people just talk. Most people just promise. You actually delivered. That makes you worth more than any money we could offer. Grace rolled up beside her father. She was still smiling, still glowing with a light that had been missing for 2 years. Say yes, she said to Ethan. Please, let them help you help others. Ethan looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, and he realized that hope was contagious. Okay, he said, okay, let's do this. The cheer that erupted from 95 throats shook the windows of the garage. Men dismounted their bikes, surged forward, surrounded Ethan with handshakes and backslaps and promises of support. In the middle of it all, Grace reached out and took Ethan's hand. Thank you, she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. For seeing me. Thank you, Ethan replied, for letting me look. The sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert. The day that had started with fear ended with something Ethan hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He'd spent 3 years thinking he was broken, thinking the IED that took his military career had taken everything else too. Thinking the best he could hope for was a slow fade into irrelevance. He was wrong. The best was just beginning. But he didn't know that yet. Didn't know that in 3 months, his garage would become a beacon for veterans across the state. Didn't know that chapters across America would adopt his methods. Didn't know that his name would reach places he'd never imagined. All he knew in this moment was that he'd taken a risk and it had paid off. That he'd done what he thought was right. That someone had actually listened. Outside, engines roared to life. 95 motorcycles preparing to escort him into a future he couldn't see, but was finally ready to face. The thunder didn't sound like judgment anymore. It sounded like hope. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Cole believed in tomorrow. 3 weeks after 95 Hell's Angels changed his life, Ethan Cole learned that hope was heavier than despair. The first veteran arrived on a Tuesday morning. His name was Marcus Reed, 29 years old, blonde hair buzzed military short, both legs gone below the knee. His wheelchair was a VA-issued model that squeaked with every push and pulled to the left no matter how many times he'd complained. You're the guy, Marcus said, rolling into Ethan's garage without introduction, the one who fixed Wolf's daughter. Word travels fast. In our community, word travels at the speed of pain. Marcus stopped his chair in front of Ethan's workbench. I've been in this thing for 4 years. 4 years of fighting the VA. 4 years of being told that the equipment is fine and I need to adjust my expectations. Sound familiar? Ethan looked at the wheelchair. Looked at the way Marcus sat in it. Looked at the tension in his shoulders. The grimace he was trying to hide, the anger burning behind his eyes. Where does it hurt? Marcus blinked. What? The chair. Where does it hurt you? For a moment, Marcus didn't respond. Then something in his face cracked. Not broke, cracked, like a dam holding back years of frustration. Everywhere, he whispered. It hurts everywhere, but nobody believes me. I believe you. You don't even know me. I don't need to know you. Ethan grabbed his tools. I just need to listen. 3 hours later, Marcus rolled out of the garage in the same wheelchair. Same frame, same wheels, same VA-issued parts. But the seat had been adjusted. The backrest had been repositioned. The push rims had been modified for his specific grip strength. He was crying. I forgot, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I forgot what it felt like to not hurt. I've been in pain so long, I thought that was just life. That was just what I deserved for surviving when my friends didn't. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. How much do I owe you, Saparchi? Nothing. That's not how this works. It's how it works here. Ethan turned back to his workbench. Tell other veterans, that's payment enough. Marcus told everyone. By the end of the first month, Ethan had helped 12 veterans. By the end of the second month, the number had doubled. Word spread through VA hospitals, through veteran Facebook groups, through the invisible network of broken soldiers who had learned to find each other in a world that had forgotten them. They came from Phoenix and Flagstaff and Yuma. They came in wheelchairs that didn't fit, and prosthetics that rubbed, and walkers that wobbled. They came with stories of bureaucracy and denial, and specialists who checked boxes instead of checking bodies. And Ethan fixed them. Not all of them, not completely. Some problems were beyond his skills, beyond anyone's skills. But he helped, he listened. He saw them as people instead of paperwork. That was more than most of them had gotten in years. Wolf kept his promise. Every week, Hell's Angels from across the state brought new cases to Ethan's garage. Veterans they'd met at bars, disabled people they'd seen struggling at gas stations, anyone who looked like they needed help and couldn't find it anywhere else. The bikers didn't ask for credit, didn't want recognition. They just kept bringing people, kept watching Ethan work, kept learning his methods so they could spread them to other chapters. Grace came every Saturday. She'd sit in her modified wheelchair, the one that no longer hurt her, and hand Ethan tools before he asked for them. Their collaboration became seamless, wordless, the kind of partnership that only developed between people who understood each other's pain. You're good at this, Ethan told her one afternoon, after they'd finished adjusting a prosthetic leg for a Marine who'd lost his limb to an IED in Fallujah. I've been on the other side, Grace said. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have people look at your equipment instead of your face, to be a problem instead of a person. You were never a problem. To you, maybe. To everyone else. She shrugged. I was a burden, a tragedy, something to be pitied and managed and eventually forgotten. And now, Grace smiled. It was the same smile Ethan had seen that first morning when she'd sat in her modified chair and felt no pain for the first time in 2 years. Now I'm useful. Now I matter. Now I can help other people feel what I felt in your garage. Her smile faded slightly. That's worth more than MIT, worth more than any degree. You're still going to MIT. I know, but this comes first. The people who need us come first. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that her education mattered, that her future mattered, that she shouldn't sacrifice her dreams for his broken garage and his broken veterans. But he didn't, because he understood. Some things were more important than plans. The trouble started in the third month. Ethan was working on a wheelchair for a Navy veteran named Diane Chen when the black SUV pulled into his parking lot. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that never brought good news. 2 men in suits climbed out. They walked toward the garage with the confident stride of people who expected doors to open and questions to be answered. Ethan Cole, the first one asked. He was tall gray at the temples, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. Depends who's asking. My name is Richard Hartwell. I'm with the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. He flashed a badge. This is my colleague, Agent Torres. We'd like to ask you some questions. Ethan's stomach tightened. About what? About the modifications you've been making to VA-issued equipment. Hartwell opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder. We've received reports that you've been altering wheelchairs, prosthetics, and other medical devices without proper authorization. I've been fixing them. Fixing implies they were broken. According to our records, all the equipment in question was functioning within normal parameters. Your records are wrong. Hartwell's expression didn't change. Mr. Cole, I understand you believe you're helping people, but VA equipment is government property. Modifying it without authorization is a federal offense. It's also potentially dangerous. You're not a licensed medical equipment technician. I'm a mechanic. Exactly, you're a mechanic, not a doctor, not an engineer, not someone qualified to make decisions about medical equipment. Hartwell pulled a document from the folder. This is a cease and desist order. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from modifying any VA-issued equipment. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges. Ethan stared at the document. The words blurred together. Federal offense. Criminal charges. Cease and desist. The veterans who come to me, you see, he said slowly, they're in pain. Real pain. Pain that nobody else will acknowledge. You want me to just turn them away? I want you to follow the law. Hartwell tucked the folder back into his briefcase. The VA has proper channels for equipment complaints. If veterans are unsatisfied with their devices, they can file grievances through the appropriate procedures. Those procedures take months, years. Some of these people can't wait that long. That's not your problem to solve, Mr. Cole. Then whose problem is it? Hartwell didn't answer. He just handed Ethan the cease and desist order and walked back to his SUV. Agent Torres followed without a word. Ethan stood in his garage doorway holding a piece of paper that could destroy everything he'd built. Diane Chen rolled up beside him. She was 62 years old, had served 20 years in the Navy, and now lived with a degenerative condition that the VA said was not service-connected, despite a stack of medical records that proved otherwise. What was that about? She asked. Ethan looked at the document, then at Diane, then at the wall of photos he'd started keeping. 37 faces now, 37 lives he'd touched in the past 3 months. Nothing, he said. Just bureaucracy. Are you in trouble? Maybe. Because of us, because of what you're doing. Ethan didn't answer. He crumpled the cease and desist order and threw it into the trash. Let's get back to work, he said. Your chair isn't going to fix itself. Wolf found out about the VA visit 3 days later. He showed up at the garage with 4 other bikers, his face carved from stone, his voice cold enough to freeze the Arizona heat. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? Don't play games, Cole. I heard about the feds. I heard about the cease and desist. Wolf stepped closer. You think you can handle this alone? You think they're just going to give up and go away? I think it's my problem. Wrong. Wolf's jaw tightened. You're part of something bigger now. What happens to you happens to us. What threatens you threatens everything we're building. I didn't ask for, I don't care what you asked for. Wolf grabbed Ethan's shoulder, forced him to make eye contact. You saved my daughter. You gave her back her life. That makes you family. And family doesn't face federal agents alone. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say that he'd been alone his whole life, that depending on others only led to disappointment, that the last person he'd trusted had packed her bags and left without saying goodbye. But Wolf's grip was firm, and his eyes were sincere. And somewhere in Ethan's chest, something that had been frozen for years started to thaw. What do you want me to do? Ethan asked. I want you to let us help. We've got lawyers, brothers who know the system, people who can make noise in the right places. Wolf released his grip. The VA doesn't want to fight. They want you to go away quietly. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. And if they come after me anyway, Wolf smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Then they'll learn what happens when you threaten family. The next 2 weeks were chaos. The Hells Angels lawyer woman named Patricia Vance, who wore designer suits and rode a Harley on weekends, filed an injunction against the cease and desist order. She argued that Ethan wasn't modifying medical equipment. He was making ergonomic adjustments that fell outside VA jurisdiction. It was a technicality. Everyone knew it was a technicality, but technicalities were how wars were won. Meanwhile, veterans kept coming. Ethan kept working. The VA sent more letters, more warnings, more threats. Ethan threw them all in the trash. You're going to get yourself arrested, Grace told him one evening after the garage had emptied and they were alone with the sunset. Maybe. That doesn't scare you. Lots of things scare me. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, stared at the grease embedded in his fingerprints. But not helping people who need help, that scares me more. Why? Because I've been where they are, not in a wheelchair, but broken, invisible, convinced that nobody saw me and nobody cared. He paused. When I got discharged from the army, I spent 6 months not talking to anyone, not leaving my apartment, not believing that my life could ever matter again. What changed? A mechanic. Ethan smiled slightly. Old guy named Pete, ran a shop outside Fort Campbell. He saw me sitting in my truck one day, staring at nothing, and he knocked on my window, asked if I needed work. I said no. He said he didn't care what I said, he needed help, and I was going to give it to him. He forced you to work. He forced me to matter, gave me something to do, something to fix, someone to talk to. Ethan's voice softened. He died 2 years ago. Heart attack. I went to his funeral, and there were 200 people there. 200 people whose lives he'd touched just by being kind, just by seeing them when nobody else did. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. That's why you do this, she said. You're trying to be Pete. I'm trying to be someone worth being. You already are. Ethan looked at her, at the girl who had been invisible for so long, at the young woman who was becoming visible again, one fixed wheelchair at a time. So are you, he said. Don't forget that. The confrontation came on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan was working on a walker for a Korean War veteran named Harold, 91 years old, legally blind, and possessed of a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush when the black SUVs returned. 3 of them this time, 6 agents. Richard Hartwell in the lead, his face tight with barely concealed anger. Ethan Cole, Hartwell said, you are in violation of a federal cease and desist order. We have a warrant for your arrest. Harold stopped swearing long enough to look up. What the hell is going on? Stay out of this, sir, Agent Torres said. Don't tell me what to do, you government pencil pusher. I stormed beaches while your grandparents were in diapers. Sir, I said don't tell me what to do. The confrontation was escalating. Ethan could see it, spiraling, could see the agents reaching for cuffs, could see Harold struggling to stand on legs that hadn't worked properly since Incheon. Then the rumble started. Everyone froze. The sound grew louder, closer. The unmistakable thunder of Harley-Davidsons, dozens of them, coming fast. Wolf appeared first, skidding to a stop inches from Hartwell's polished shoes. Behind him, 30 bikers fanned out across the parking lot, creating a wall of chrome and leather between the federal agents and Ethan's garage. Problem here, Wolf asked, his voice deceptively calm. This is federal business, Hartwell said. I suggest you and your friends leave immediately. I suggest you read this first. Wolf handed him a document. It's an emergency injunction from the Ninth Circuit Court. Patricia Vance filed it this morning. Your cease and desist order has been suspended pending judicial review. Hartwell's face went pale. That's impossible. Apparently not, Wolf smiled. Also, you might want to check your email. There's a story running on CNN in about 20 minutes. Something about a disabled veteran who fixed what the VA couldn't. Something about a federal agency trying to shut down a hero who's helping other heroes. You leaked this to the press. We didn't leak anything. The veterans you've been ignoring for years, they have voices, they have social media, they have a whole lot of anger and nowhere to put it. Wolf's smile widened. Until now. Hartwell stood frozen for a long moment. His agents looked at him, waiting for orders. The bikers looked at Wolf, ready for anything. The tension was a living thing crackling in the air, like lightning about to strike. Then Hartwell's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face went from pale to gray. We're leaving, he said quietly. Sir, Agent Torres asked. I said we're leaving. Hartwell turned and walked back to his SUV. The other agents followed, casting nervous glances at the wall of bikers watching them go. When the last black vehicle disappeared down the road, Harold let out a whoop that probably violated several noise ordinances. That's what I'm talking about, he shouted. That's how you handle bureaucrats. You show them who really runs this country. The bikers laughed. Wolf clapped Ethan on the shoulder. Grace rolled out of the garage, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. But Ethan didn't laugh. He stared at the road where the SUVs had vanished. This isn't over, he said quietly. Wolf's smile faded. No, it's not. They'll come back with more lawyers, more agents, more power. Probably. So what do we do? Wolf turned to face him. His eyes held something Ethan had never seen before. Not anger, not determination, something deeper, something older. We build, Wolf said. We build so big and so fast that they can't tear it down. We spread this to every chapter in every state. We make it so visible, so public, so goddamn necessary that shutting us down becomes politically impossible. That's a war. It's always been a war. Wolf's voice hardened. The VA has been failing veterans for decades. Politicians have been making promises and breaking them for longer. The system doesn't work because the system doesn't want to work. It wants to process, to manage, to check boxes and move on. And you think we can change that? I think one man who cares can do more than 1,000 who don't. I've seen it. I saw it when you fixed my daughter. I saw it when you fixed Marcus and Diane and all the others. Wolf stepped closer. You're not just a mechanic anymore, Cole. You're a symbol. And symbols are harder to kill than men. Ethan thought about Pete, about the 200 people at his funeral, about the lives touched by a single act of kindness multiplied across years. Okay, he said finally, let's build. The CNN story aired that night. They called Ethan the mechanic who listens. They showed footage of veterans in his garage crying as they sat in chairs that finally fit. They interviewed Grace, who talked about 2 years of pain that nobody acknowledged. They interviewed Wolf, who looked less like a biker and more like a father who had almost lost everything. They did not interview the VA. The VA declined to comment. By morning, Ethan's story had gone viral. His phone rang so many times he had to turn it off. His email crashed. A line of news vans appeared outside his garage, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like mechanical flowers. And the veterans kept coming, not just from Arizona anymore, from California, from Nevada, from New Mexico and Texas and Colorado. They drove and flew and took buses carrying broken equipment and broken hopes, following a story they'd seen on television about a man who actually listened. Ethan couldn't help them all. He knew that. Even with Grace, even with the bikers, even working 18-hour days until his bad legs screamed and his eyes burned and his hands cramped around his tools. But he helped the ones he could. One wheelchair at a time, one prosthetic at a time, one human being at a time. And slowly, painfully, magnificently, something began to change. Other mechanics started calling. Veterans with skills who wanted to learn his methods. Garage owners across the country who offered their spaces for satellite operations. Engineers who were tired of building equipment that nobody actually tested on real humans. The network grew, the movement spread, and in a crumbling garage on the forgotten edge of Tucson, Arizona, a broke mechanic with a bum leg and a dying business discovered that he wasn't dying at all. He was just getting started. The phone call came at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. Ethan answered without looking at the screen, his voice rough with exhaustion. Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Phoenix VA Medical Center. The voice was crisp, professional, and held an edge of barely controlled panic. We have a situation. What kind of situation? A veteran, Thomas Bradley, Iraq veteran double amputee. He's been on our waiting list for a new prosthetic fitting for 8 months. Tonight she paused, swallowed. Tonight he tried to hurt himself. Ethan sat up suddenly wide awake. Is he okay? He's stable, but he's refusing to talk to our counselors. He's refusing to talk to anyone. Except, another pause. Except he keeps asking for you. He saw the CNN story. He says you're the only one who might understand. I'm not a counselor. I know, but he's not asking for a counselor. He's asking for someone who listens. Dr. Mitchell's voice cracked slightly. Mr. Cole, I've been working in the VA system for 15 years. I've seen a lot of veterans fall through the cracks. I've seen a lot of promises broken and hopes destroyed. But I've never seen anyone like you, someone who actually gives a damn. A lot of people give a damn. A lot of people say they give a damn. It's not the same thing. She took a breath. Will you come? Please, I know it's the middle of the night. I know you're probably exhausted. But this man is asking for you by name, and I don't know what else to do. Ethan looked at his leg, at the scar tissue that never stopped aching, at the Purple Heart on his wall, and the photos of veterans and he'd helped, and the tools that had become extensions of his hands. Send me the address, he said. I'll be there in an hour. Thomas Bradley was 34 years old. He had joined the army at 18, served 3 tours in Iraq, and lost both legs to a roadside bomb on his 3rd deployment. He had received the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and a medical discharge that came with a lifetime of pain and a promise that his country would take care of him. The promise had been broken. For 8 months, Thomas had waited for a prosthetic fitting. For 8 months, he had called and emailed and filled out forms and talked to caseworkers who promised action and delivered nothing. For 8 months, he had sat in a wheelchair that didn't fit in an apartment that wasn't accessible in a life that had shrunk to the size of his pain. Tonight, he had decided he'd had enough. Ethan found him in a private room, wrist bandaged, eyes empty. A nurse stood by the door looking grateful for anyone to take over. "Thomas," Ethan said, quietly pulling up a chair. The man's eyes focused, slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. "You're him," Thomas said. "The mechanic." "Yeah, I'm him. They said you listen." "I try." "Will you listen to me?" Ethan leaned forward. "That's why I'm here." Thomas started talking. He talked about the bomb, about the moment of impact, about waking up in a field hospital and looking down and seeing nothing where his legs used to be. He talked about the surgeries, the physical therapy, the promises from doctors and politicians and VA administrators who swore that heroes like him would never be forgotten. He talked about coming home, about his wife leaving because she couldn't handle it, about his kids looking at him differently, about the wheelchair that rubbed and the prosthetics that didn't fit, and the system that treated him like a number instead of a name. He talked about tonight, about the razor, about the moment when death seemed easier than living. And Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, didn't tell Thomas that everything would be okay, or that life was worth living, or that help was available if he just asked. He just listened. When Thomas finally stopped talking, the sun was coming up. His voice was hoarse. His face was wet with tears he didn't bother to wipe away. "I'm tired," Thomas said. "I'm so goddamn tired." "I know. Does it get better?" Ethan thought about his own journey, about the 6 months of silence, about Pete in the garage and the slow, painful process of becoming human again. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "Not always, but sometimes." "How?" "One day at a time, one fix at a time, one person who sees you at a time." Ethan reached out, put his hand on Thomas's arm. "I see you, Thomas. I see what you sacrificed. I see what you're carrying, and I'm going to help you carry it. How you're just a mechanic." "Yeah," Ethan smiled slightly, "but I'm a damn good one, and your wheelchair sucks." Thomas stared at him. Then incredibly, he laughed. A broken, rusty sound, but a laugh. "It really does, yeah," Thomas said. "It really, really does. So let's fix that first. Then we'll figure out the rest." "You think it's that simple?" "No, but I think it's a start." Ethan stood up, wincing as his bad leg protested. "And sometimes a start is all we need." Thomas looked at Ethan's leg, at the way he favored it, at the pain he was clearly hiding. "You're broken too," Thomas said. "Yeah. But you're still here." "Yeah. Why busty?" Ethan thought about the question. Really thought about it, about all the reasons he'd found to keep going when everything in him wanted to stop. "Because someone once told me that mechanics keep people alive," he said finally. "Every bolt you tighten, every system you check, that's someone's kid coming. Good being home. I believe that in Afghanistan. I believe it here." He paused. "And I believe you're worth keeping alive, Thomas Bradley. Even if you've forgotten it, even if nobody else has remembered it, I believe it." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. "Fix my wheelchair," he said, "and maybe I'll let you fix the rest." Ethan shook his hand. "Deal." 3 days later, Thomas Bradley rolled out of Ethan's garage in a wheelchair that actually fit. His prosthetics appointment had been expedited, courtesy of Dr. Mitchell pulling strings she didn't know she had. His case had been assigned to a new worker who actually returned phone calls. He wasn't fixed. Not completely. Maybe not ever. But he was alive. And for now, that was enough. Grace found Ethan that evening sitting alone in the garage, staring at nothing. "You saved his life," she said. "I fixed his wheelchair." "Same thing." She rolled closer. "My dad told me what happened. What you did, driving to Phoenix in the middle of the night for someone you'd never met. He asked for me. Nobody's ever asked for me before. People are asking for you now. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. Grace studied his face. Does that scare you? Terrifies me. Why? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. The garage was dark except for a single work light. Outside the desert, wind howled through gaps in the walls. Because I'm not a hero, he finally said. I'm just a guy who knows how to fix things. And the world needs more than a mechanic. The world needs someone who can change systems, change policies, change the way people think about disability, and veterans, and everyone who falls through the cracks. You're already changing things. Not enough. Never enough. His hands clenched on his knees. Thomas Bradley almost died because he waited 8 months for an appointment. 8 months, and he's one of thousands. Tens of thousands. How many are out there right now sitting in wheelchairs that hurt them waiting for help that never comes? You can't save everyone. I know. His voice broke slightly. But I want to. God help me, I want to. Grace reached out and took his hand. Then we'll try, she said, together, one person at a time, until we can't try anymore. Ethan looked at her, at the girl who had been invisible, at the woman who refused to be invisible anymore. When did you get so wise, he asked, when someone finally listened to me? She squeezed his hand. Now come on, we've got work to do tomorrow, and you need sleep. Sleep is overrated. Sleep is how we stay alive long enough to help people. She tugged him toward the door. Even mechanics need rest, Ethan. Even heroes. I'm not a hero. Tell that to Thomas Bradley, she smiled. Tell that to all of them. Ethan wanted to argue, but he was too tired. So he let Grace lead him out of the garage into the cool desert night toward a future he still couldn't see, but was finally starting to believe in. Behind them, the work light flickered once and went dark. But the wall of photos remained. 43 faces now. 43 lives touched. 43 reasons to keep going. And tomorrow there would be more. The call that changed everything came 6 days after Thomas Bradley. Ethan was underneath a wheelchair adjusting the axle alignment for a Vietnam veteran named George who had been waiting 3 hours without complaint when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. Buzzed again. Ignored it again. The third time Grace picked it up. Ethan's phone, she said. Then her face went pale. Hold on. I'm putting you on speaker. The voice that filled the garage was Patricia Vance, the Hells Angels lawyer who had saved Ethan from arrest 2 weeks earlier. Ethan, we have a problem. He slid out from under the wheelchair, his bad legs screaming. What kind of problem? A veteran named Samuel Torres died this morning in El Paso. I don't know anyone named Samuel Torres. You fixed his wheelchair 3 weeks ago. VA issued. You adjusted the seat height and modified the wheel locks. Patricia's voice was tight. He fell out of the chair this morning, hit his head on a concrete floor. He died before the ambulance arrived. Ethan's blood went cold. That's impossible. I tested those wheel locks myself. I tested them a dozen times. I believe you, but the VA doesn't. They're claiming your unauthorized modifications caused the malfunction. They're reopening their case against you, and this time they're adding negligent homicide to the charges. George, the Vietnam veteran, looked up at Ethan with fear in his eyes. Grace's hands were shaking. The garage, which had been filled with the comfortable sounds of work and conversation, went silent. I didn't kill anyone, Ethan said. I know, but proving that is going to be a fight. Patricia exhaled slowly. They're sending investigators tomorrow. They want to inspect every piece of equipment you've modified in the past 4 months. Every wheelchair, every prosthetic, everything. That's hundreds of devices. I know. Scattered across 6 states. Her voice hardened. Ethan, listen to me carefully. The VA has been looking for a way to shut you down ever since the CNN story. This death gives them exactly what they need. A tragedy, a villain, a narrative that makes them look like protectors instead of failures. So what do? So you find out what really happened to Samuel Torres. Because if his death wasn't your fault, then someone else is responsible. And whoever that someone is, they're going to try very hard to make sure you take the fall. The line went dead. Ethan stood in his garage surrounded by veterans who had trusted him with their mobility, their dignity, their lives. Every single one of them was looking at him with the same question in their eyes. Did you kill that man? I didn't. Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. I swear to God I didn't. But even as he said it, a seed of doubt planted itself in his chest. What if he'd made a mistake? What if his exhaustion, his obsession with helping as many people as possible had caused him to overlook something? What if Samuel Torres was dead because of him? Wolf arrived within the hour. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself. Just walked into the garage with 4 brothers behind him, his face carved from granite. Tell me what happened. Ethan told him, every detail, the phone call, the accusation, the investigation coming tomorrow. Wolf listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, the big man turned to one of his brothers. Demon, get on the phone with our El Paso chapter. I want to know everything about Samuel Torres, where he lived, who he knew, what happened in those last 24 hours. Demon nodded and stepped outside, already dialing. Razor's on his way, Wolf continued. We're calling an emergency meeting tonight. Every brother who's helped with this operation. Every veteran you've worked with who's willing to testify. Testify to what? To the fact that you're not a killer. Wolf grabbed Ethan's shoulder. I've seen your work. I've watched you spend 12 hours on a single wheelchair because you weren't satisfied with how it rolled. You don't make mistakes, Cole. And even if you did, a seat height adjustment doesn't cause wheel lock failure. That's basic mechanics. The VA won't care about basic mechanics. They care about headlines. Then we'll give them different headlines. Wolf's grip tightened. You're not going down for this. I won't let it happen. Why? Ethan asked. Why does this matter so much to you? Your daughter is fine. You don't owe me anything anymore. Wolf stared at him for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes. Something old and painful. You want to know why I started this club? Wolf said quietly. Why I've spent 20 years riding with men most people cross the street to avoid? I never asked. My brother was a Marine, 2 tours in Vietnam, came home in a wheelchair. Wolf's voice dropped even lower. He spent 3 years fighting the VA for equipment that actually worked. 3 years of being told his problems were in his head. 3 years of pain that nobody believed. Ethan felt his chest tighten. What happened to him? He killed himself, put a gun in his mouth on Christmas morning because he couldn't take it anymore. Wolf's jaw clenched. I was 19 years old. I found the body. Jesus. I swore that day that I would never let the system destroy another veteran. Never let another brother die because nobody gave a damn. Wolf released Ethan's shoulder. Then I met you, and for the first time in 30 years, I saw someone who understood. Someone who actually cared. Someone who could do what I couldn't. I'm just a mechanic. You're my brother's second chance. Wolf's eyes were bright with tears he would never let fall, and I will burn this entire country to the ground before I let them take that away. The investigation team arrived at dawn. 6 federal agents, 2 VA officials, a medical equipment specialist who looked at Ethan like he was already guilty. Richard Hartwell led them, his face triumphant. He'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for Ethan to fail. Mr. Cole, Hartwell said, holding up a warrant, we're here to inspect your equipment and your records. I suggest you cooperate fully. I have nothing to hide. That's what they all say. The next 8 hours were a nightmare. Agents photographed every tool in Ethan's garage. They cataloged every piece of equipment. They interviewed George and the 3 other veterans who had stayed despite being told they could leave. And they found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Ethan's work was meticulous. His records were detailed. Every modification he had ever made was documented, tested, and verified. By late afternoon, Hartwell's triumph had curdled into frustration. His team had been through everything. Twice. They had no evidence of negligence, no evidence of substandard work, no evidence of anything except a mechanic who cared too much about veterans the government had forgotten. This doesn't prove anything, Hartwell said, packing up his equipment. It proves I didn't kill Samuel Torres. It proves your garage is clean. That's not the same thing. Hartwell turned to face Ethan, his voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. You think you're some kind of hero? You think you can embarrass the VA and get away with it? We have resources you can't imagine. Connections you can't fight. Sooner or later we'll find something. And when we do, I'll personally make sure you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Why? Ethan asked. Why does shutting me down matter so much to you? Hartwell's expression flickered. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Ethan to see something he hadn't expected. Fear. Then the mask was back, and Hartwell was walking out the door, leaving Ethan alone with questions he couldn't answer. Demon returned that night with information. He walked into Ethan's garage carrying a folder thick with papers, his face grim. Samuel Torres, he said, dropping the folder on the workbench. 67 years old, Iraq veteran. Lost both legs to an IED in 2006. He's been fighting the VA for proper equipment for 18 years. 18 years? Gets worse. He filed 37 complaints about his wheelchair in the last 3 years alone. 37, all denied, all marked as resolved. Demon pulled out a photograph. This is the wheelchair he died in. Ethan looked at the photo. It took him 3 seconds to see the problem. That's not the chair I modified. What? Look at the frame. The one I worked on had a titanium frame with a custom weld mark on the left side. This one's steel. Standard issue. Ethan's heart was pounding. Someone switched his wheelchair. Why would anyone do that? Because the chair I gave him worked. Someone wanted it to fail. The room went silent. Wolf stepped forward, took the photo from Ethan's hands, studied it with eyes that had seen violence and deception and betrayal. You're saying this was deliberate? I'm saying Samuel Torres didn't die because of my modifications. He died because someone put him back in the chair that was killing him. Who? Ethan didn't answer. But his mind was already racing through possibilities. The VA wanted him shut down. Hartwell had made that clear. But murder, would they really kill a veteran just to frame a mechanic? Then he remembered what Patricia had said. Someone else is responsible. And whoever that someone is, they're going to try very hard to make sure you take the fall. Grace called at midnight. Her voice was strange, thin, like she was speaking from very far away. Ethan. Grace, what's wrong? I'm at the hospital. A long pause. Something's happening with my body. They don't know what's wrong. Ethan was in his truck within 60 seconds. He drove through the desert night at speeds that would have gotten him arrested, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his mind refusing to consider the possibilities. Not Grace, not after everything. Not her. The hospital was chaos. Wolf was in the waiting room pacing like a caged animal. 4 bikers stood guard at the entrance, keeping reporters and curious onlookers at bay. What happened? Ethan demanded. She collapsed. 2 hours ago. 1 minute she was fine, the next she was on the floor, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Wolf's voice broke. They're running tests. They won't tell me anything. Her condition, the SMA. They don't know. They don't know anything. Wolf grabbed Ethan's shirt, pulled him close. You fixed her. You gave her back her life. You have to fix this too. I'm not a doctor. I don't care what you are. Find a way. A nurse approached, her face professional, but her eyes soft with sympathy. Mr. Hawkins, the doctor will see you now. Wolf and Ethan followed her through sterile hallways to a private room where Grace lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and measured things Ethan didn't understand. She looked small, fragile. Nothing like the fierce young woman who had become his partner, his friend, his reason for believing that change was possible. Hey, Grace whispered when she saw them. Hey yourself. Ethan took her hand. What did I tell you about scaring your father? That it's funny. That it's bad for my blood pressure. Wolf sat on the other side of the bed, his massive hand engulfing his daughter's. What are the doctors saying? Grace's expression changed. The forced lightness disappeared, replaced by something Ethan had seen before. Fear. They think it's a complication from the SMA. My respiratory muscles are weakening faster than they expected. The crash triggered more damage than they originally diagnosed. What does that mean? It means, Grace's voice caught, it means I might need a ventilator. Eventually, it means the chair modifications help my mobility, but they can't help my lungs. It means... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. He'd spent 4 months fixing bodies, fixing equipment, fixing problems that other people couldn't solve. He'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could actually make a difference. But he couldn't fix this. No wrench in the world could fix this. Don't, Grace said suddenly. Don't what? Don't look at me like that, like I'm already gone. Her grip tightened on his hand. I'm not dying today. I'm not dying tomorrow. I'm going to fight this the same way I've fought everything else. And I need you to fight with me. How? By not giving up, by keeping the garage open, by helping the veterans who still need you. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Samuel Torres didn't die because of your modifications. Someone killed him to get to you, and if you quit now, they win. Everything we've built, everything we've accomplished, dies with me. You're not dying. Maybe not today, but someday. Someday this disease is going to win. Grace pulled Ethan closer. I need to know that when that day comes, the work continues. The mission continues, that my life meant something more than just pain and waiting rooms and equipment that never worked right. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that she had decades left, that medicine would find a cure, that hope wasn't just a word people used when they had nothing else. But he knew Grace, knew she wouldn't accept comfortable lies. I won't quit, he said. I promise. And you'll find out who killed Samuel Torres. I'll find out, and you'll make them pay. Ethan looked at Wolf. The big man's face was wet with tears, but his eyes held something else, something ancient and merciless. We'll make them pay, Ethan said, together. Grace smiled, that same smile from the first morning, the smile that had started everything. Good, now go, both of you. I need to sleep, and you have work to do. I'm not leaving, Wolf said. I said I'm not leaving. I'm not. Grace sighed, but there was love in it. Fine, but Ethan has to go. The garage doesn't run itself. Ethan squeezed her hand one more time. Then he stood, walked to the door, and turned back. Grace, yeah, thank you for believing in me. Thank you for seeing me first. He left before she could see him cry. The truth about Samuel Torres emerged 3 days later. It came not from federal investigators or VA officials or legal proceedings funds. It came from a woman named Maria Torres, Samuel's daughter, who drove 14 hours from El Paso to Tucson because she had something she needed to say. She found Ethan in his garage alone working on a wheelchair that belonged to no one, just working to keep his hands busy, to keep his mind from spiraling into places it couldn't return from. Mr. Cole, he looked up. She was small, maybe 5'2", with the kind of exhausted eyes that came from crying until there were no tears left. Can I help you? I'm Maria Torres. Samuel was my father. Ethan set down his tools slowly. His heart was pounding. He didn't know what she was here for. Accusations, anger, a lawsuit. All of the above. I'm sorry for your loss, he said carefully. I'm not here for apologies. Maria stepped into the garage. I'm here to tell you what really happened. She pulled a folder from her bag, different from the one Demon had brought, thicker, more personal. My father loved that wheelchair you modified. He called me every day after he got it back, said it was the first time in 18 years that he felt like a man again instead of a burden, said you actually listened to him, actually cared. I did care. I know, that's why this is so important. Maria opened the folder. 2 weeks after you fixed his chair, a man came to his apartment, said he was from the VA, said there had been complaints about unauthorized modifications, said he needed to take the wheelchair for inspection. Take it. My father refused. Said he'd rather die than give up the only equipment that had ever worked for him. Maria's voice hardened. So they came back, 3 nights later, while my father was sleeping. They broke into his apartment and switched the wheelchairs, left the old one that had been torturing him for years, took the one you fixed. Ethan felt sick. They stole it. They murdered him. Maria's eyes filled with tears she was too angry to shed. The old wheelchair had faulty wheel locks. My father knew it. He'd complained about it 37 times, but nobody listened. Nobody ever listened. The VA, not just the VA, someone higher, someone who wanted you destroyed badly enough to kill a veteran to do it. Maria handed him the folder. I've been investigating since the funeral. Phone records, visitor logs, security footage from my father's building. Everything points to one name. Ethan opened the folder, read the documents inside, felt his blood turn to ice. Richard Hartwell, the same VA investigator who had been trying to shut him down for months, the same man who had promised to put Ethan in prison, the same official who had looked at him with fear in his eyes when Ethan had asked why this mattered so much. Hartwell was there, Maria said. The night they switched the wheelchairs. I have footage. Grainy but clear enough. He supervised the entire operation. Why would a VA investigator murder a veteran? Because my father was going to testify. Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. He'd been collecting evidence for years. Documentation of equipment failures, deaths that had been covered up, complaints that had been buried. He was going to blow the whole thing open. And Hartwell knew. Hartwell was named in the evidence, him and 6 other officials. They've been falsifying equipment reports for over a decade, approving substandard devices, taking kickbacks from manufacturers, letting veterans die to protect their careers. Ethan stared at the documents. Names, dates, numbers. The bones of a conspiracy that stretched across the entire VA system. Why are you giving this to me? Because you're the only one who cared enough to help my father, and because you're the only one brave enough to fight back. Maria closed the folder. My father believed in you, Mr. Cole. He died believing that someone would finally expose the truth. I'm asking you to prove him right. Ethan looked at the folder in his hands, at the evidence that could destroy careers and end cover-ups and maybe, just maybe, save lives. Then he looked at Maria Torres. I'll need help, he said. You have an army of bikers and a network of veterans across 6 states. Maria smiled through her tears. I think you have all the help you need. The War Council met that night. Wolf, Razor, Patricia Vance, Demon, Marcus Reed, who had become one of Ethan's most loyal advocates, and via video call chapter presidents from 12 states who had adopted Ethan's methods and built their own networks. 47 faces on a screen, hundreds more represented, all of them listening as Ethan laid out what Maria Torres had brought him. Hartwell isn't working alone, Ethan said. This goes all the way to the top of the VA's equipment procurement division. They've been approving faulty equipment for years, taking money from manufacturers to look the other way, covering up deaths when veterans complained. How many deaths? Razor asked. Maria's father counted at least 200 suspicious cases over the past decade. Veterans who died in equipment-related accidents that were ruled user error or natural causes. Veterans whose complaints were buried. Veterans who gave up and took their own lives because nobody would help. 200. Wolf's voice was barely controlled rage. 200 veterans dead and nobody noticed. People noticed. They just couldn't prove anything. Ethan held up the folder. Now we can. Patricia Vance leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Otter? We go public, everything Maria's father collected, everything we've gathered in the past 4 months. We release it to every news outlet, every congressional office, every veteran organization in the country. That's going to make a lot of powerful people very angry. Good. Ethan met her eyes. They should be angry. They should be terrified. Because what they've been doing is murder. And it's time someone called it what it is. They'll come after you, Baini, Wolf said. Harder than before. They'll try to discredit you, arrest you, maybe worse, Lapim. Let them try. This isn't a game, Cole. These people kill veterans who threaten them. What do you think they'll do to you? Ethan thought about Grace in her hospital bed, about Thomas Bradley and his bandaged wrists, about Marcus Reed crying in a wheelchair that finally fit, about 43 faces on his wall, and hundreds more across the country who had found hope in a crumbling garage in Arizona. I think they'll try to destroy me, he said quietly, and I think they'll fail, because I'm not alone anymore, because we've built something that can't be killed by taking out one man. He looked at the screen, at the faces of chapter presidents and veteran advocates and ordinary people who had decided that enough was enough. We're not just mechanics anymore. We're a movement, and movements don't die. They grow. Razor spoke first. What do you need? And everything, every chapter, every veteran you can reach, every politician who owes you a favor, every journalist who wants a story. Ethan took a breath. This is the fight we've been building toward, the fight that matters. Are you in? Silence. Then one by one the faces on the screen nodded. Wolf nodded, Razor nodded. Patricia Vance smiled like a shark scenting blood. Well then, she said, let's go to war. The first story broke at 6 a.m. the next morning. It was published simultaneously in the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN. 300 pages of documents, 200 suspicious deaths, names of VA officials who had been taking bribes for a decade, and at the center of it all, a broke mechanic from Arizona who had dared to care. By noon, Hartwell had been arrested. By evening, 6 more officials had resigned. By midnight, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs had announced a complete review of equipment procurement policies. And Ethan Cole, the mechanic who listened, sat alone in his garage, surrounded by the tools that had started everything, watching the world change on a television screen that barely got reception. His phone buzzed. "Grace, are you watching?" she asked. Her voice was stronger today. "The doctor said she was improving, said the crisis had passed for now. I'm watching." "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it." "No." Grace's voice was fierce. You saw what nobody else saw. You believed when nobody else believed. You fought when everyone said fighting was impossible." Ethan didn't know what to say. He was exhausted, broken, overwhelmed by everything that had happened and everything that was still coming. "I'm proud of you," Grace said softly. "My father is proud of you. Everyone who's ever sat in your garage and felt heard for the first time, they're proud of you. It's not over. Nothing good is ever over." She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Ethan had ever heard. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we have work to do. More wheelchairs. More everything. The world knows about you now, Ethan Cole. They know why is it possible when someone actually cares. And they're going to want to learn how you did it." Ethan looked at his wall of photos. 43 faces, 43 lives changed. Tomorrow there would be more, and the day after that, and the day after that. Until the day he couldn't do it anymore. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow." The line went dead. Ethan set down his phone, turned off the television, and looked around his garage. The cracked concrete, the peeling paint, the tools that had become extensions of his hands. This was where it had started. This was where it would continue. And somehow, impossibly, against every odd and obstacle and enemy, it had become something more than a failing business on the forgotten edge of the desert. It had become hope. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The morning after Hartwell's arrest, Ethan woke to find 17 veterans sleeping in his parking lot. They had driven through the night from California, Nevada, New Mexico. Some came in vans modified for wheelchair access. Some came in trucks with hand controls. Some came in buses organized by local veteran groups who had seen the news and decided that if help existed, they would find it. Ethan stood in his garage doorway, coffee growing cold in his hand, watching the sun rise over a sea of broken bodies and desperate hope. "They started arriving around midnight," Wolf said, walking up beside him. "We tried to turn them away, but they wouldn't go. Said they'd wait as long as it took." "I can't help all of them." "You don't have to. We've got brothers coming from 6 chapters. Mechanics you trained over the past 4 months. They'll set up stations in the parking lot, start processing people while you handle the complicated cases." "This is insane. This is what you built." Wolf put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Did you really think the world would see that news story and do nothing? You showed them what's possible. Now they want it for themselves." Ethan looked at the veterans in his parking lot. Some were talking to each other, sharing stories of equipment failures and VA denials, and years of being told their problems were imaginary. Some were sleeping, exhausted from journeys that had started the moment they saw his face on television. Some were just sitting, staring at his garage like it was a church, and he was the priest who could absolve their suffering. "I'm not ready for this." "Nobody's ever ready." Wolf squeezed his shoulder. "But you do it anyway. That's what makes it matter." The first veteran Ethan saw that day was a woman named Jennifer Okonkwo, 41 years old, Army nurse, 2 tours in Afghanistan. She'd come home with PTSD that the VA acknowledged and a spinal injury they said was pre-existing. Her wheelchair was a nightmare of poor design and worse fitting. "I've been fighting them for 7 years, Jennifer said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. 7 years of appeals and denials and being told I'm exaggerating. 7 years of watching my body break down in equipment that doesn't work. Tell me where it hurts." Jennifer laughed. It was a bitter sound. "Where doesn't it hurt?" Ethan spent 3 hours with her, measuring, adjusting, listening. By the time he finished, her wheelchair actually fit her body for the first time since she'd received it. She didn't cry. Ethan had learned that not everyone cried. Some people had run out of tears long ago. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank me by telling others." "I will, but first I want to tell you something." Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes intense. "That man on TV, Hartwell, he denied my claim personally, signed the letter himself. I kept it because I wanted to remember his name. He's in custody now." "I know, but he's not the only one." Jennifer pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I've spent 7 years documenting everything. Names, dates, patterns. Hartwell was bad, but he had help. Lots of help." She handed Ethan the paper. It was a list, 37 names, officials across the VA system who had denied claims, buried complaints, approved faulty equipment. "How did you get this?" "I'm a nurse. I know how to keep records. And I know how to network with other veterans who've been screwed by the same people." Jennifer's jaw tightened. "Maria Torres gave you the proof about equipment fraud. I'm giving you the proof about systematic denial. Put them together and you've got a case that goes all the way to Washington." Ethan stared at the list. 37 names. 37 people who had chosen careers over veterans' lives. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you're the only one who's actually done something." Jennifer started rolling toward the door. "Everyone else just talks. You fix." She left. Ethan looked at the paper in his hands, then at the parking lot full of veterans still waiting, then at his phone, which was buzzing with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Mr. Cole, this is Senator Elizabeth Warren's office. The senator would like to meet with you." The meeting happened 3 days later in Phoenix. Ethan had never been inside a government building like this. Everything was polished marble and echoing footsteps and people in expensive suits who looked at him like he didn't belong. They were right, he didn't belong, but he was here anyway. Senator Warren was smaller than she looked on television, sharper too. Her eyes missed nothing. "Mr. Cole," she said, shaking his hand, "I've been following your story with great interest." "Thank you, Senator." "Don't thank me yet. I asked you here because I need to know if you're serious." "Serious about what?" "About changing the system." Warren sat down, gestured for him to do the same. "What you've done is remarkable. You've exposed corruption, helped hundreds of veterans, built a network that spans a dozen states. But you've also made powerful enemies. People who will do anything to stop you. They already tried. They killed Samuel Torres. And they'll try again. Hartwell was a mid-level functionary. The people above him are still in place, still protected, still dangerous." Warren leaned forward. "I can help you. My committee has subpoena power. We can launch a full investigation into VA equipment procurement. But I need your evidence, all of it. Maria Torres's files, Jennifer Okonkwo's list, everything you have gathered. And what do I get in return?" Warren smiled. It wasn't a politician's smile, it was something realer. "You get to testify before Congress. You get to tell your story to the entire country, and you get to watch the people who hurt veterans face actual consequences." Ethan thought about it, about the risk, about the exposure, about becoming a target not just for VA officials, but for everyone who profited from the broken system. Then he thought about Grace, about Thomas Bradley, about Samuel Torres, and all the veterans whose names he would never know. "I'll do it." "Good." Warren stood, extended her hand again. "Mr. Cole, I've been in politics for 30 years. I've met a lot of people who talk about change. You're the first one who actually makes it happen. I'm just a mechanic. You're what this country needs." She smiled again. "Now let's go fix something." The congressional hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks to organize evidence. 6 weeks to prepare testimony that would expose decades of corruption and potentially send dozens of officials to prison. 6 weeks that Ethan spent in a blur of work and preparation and sleepless nights. The veterans kept coming, not just to his garage anymore, but to satellite locations across 12 states. Mechanics he trained were running their own operations, using his methods, building their own networks. The movement had become a machine, and the machine didn't need him to run every part of it anymore. That should have been a relief. Instead, it terrified him. "You're afraid of success," Grace told him one evening. She was out of the hospital now, back in her modified wheelchair, working alongside him like nothing had changed. I'm afraid of failing. Same thing for you. She handed him a wrench before he asked for it. You've built something that matters, something that will outlast you, and that scares you because it means you actually have something to lose. When did you become a psychologist? When I spent 2 years watching people look at me without seeing me. Grace smiled. You see too much, Ethan. That's your gift and your curse. You see broken things that need fixing, and you can't rest until they're fixed. But some things can't be fixed by one person. Some things need armies. I don't know how to lead an army. You already are. You just don't call it that. She gestured at the garage, at the photos on the wall now numbering over 100, at the mechanics working in the parking lot, at the veterans arriving every day from farther and farther away. This is your army, and they don't need you to lead them. They just need you to show them it's possible. Ethan looked at the photos, at the faces of people whose lives he'd touched, at the evidence of 4 months of work that had somehow become something larger than himself. I'm tired, he admitted. I know. I don't know if I can do this hearing. Stand up in front of Congress. Tell my story to the whole country. You can. How do you know? Grace reached out, touched his face gently. Because you're Ethan Cole, the mechanic who listens. The man who fixed me when nobody else could. The person who saw Samuel Torres as a human being instead of a statistic. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You've already done the impossible. This is just the next step. And if I fail, then you fail. And we try again. And we keep trying until we can't try anymore. She dropped her hand. That's what you taught me. That's what you've taught all of us. That failure isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something else. Ethan didn't know what to say. So he did what he always did when words failed. He went back to work. The week before the hearing, Ethan's father called. He hadn't spoken to his father in 3 years. Not since the divorce. Not since his dad had told him that his marriage failed because he cared more about machines than people. I saw you on TV, his father said. His voice was older than Ethan remembered. Weaker. I figured. You looked good. Confident. I don't feel confident. A long pause, the kind of silence that held years of things unsaid. I was wrong, his father finally said. What I told you about caring more about machines than people, I was wrong. Ethan's throat tightened. Dad, let me finish. I've been watching the news, reading the articles, talking to people who know people who've met you, and I understand now. You don't care about machines. You care about the people the machines are supposed to help. You just show it differently than most. I learned it from you. Bullshit. You learned it despite me. I pushed you away because I didn't understand, and I almost lost you because of it. His father's voice broke. I'm sorry, son. I'm so goddamn sorry. Ethan closed his eyes. 15 years of distance, 10 years of disappointment, 3 years of silence. All of it crumbling in the face of words he'd never expected to hear. I forgive you, he said. You shouldn't. Probably not, but I do anyway. Ethan opened his eyes. Are you coming to the hearing? Wild horses couldn't keep me away. It might be ugly. They're going to try to destroy me. Then they'll have to go through me first. His father laughed a sound Ethan hadn't heard in years. I know I wasn't there when you needed me, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Thanks, Dad. Thank you for becoming the man I should have helped you become. The line went dead. Ethan sat in the silence of his garage phone in hand, tears streaming down his face. It was the first time he'd cried in years. The night before the hearing, everything fell apart. Ethan was packing his briefcase when Wolf burst through the garage door, his face twisted with rage and fear. They took her. Took who? Grace. They took Grace. Ethan's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? 2 hours ago, she was at the hospital for a checkup. Men in suits grabbed her in the parking lot, put her in a van, drove away before anyone could stop them. Who? I don't know. The security footage is useless. The cops are saying it's a kidnapping, but they're not doing anything. Wolf's voice cracked. They left a note. They want you to cancel your testimony. No testimony and they'll release her. You go to Congress tomorrow and they'll... He couldn't finish. Ethan's mind was racing. The hearing was in 14 hours. Months of preparation. Evidence that could change the entire VA system. Testimony that could save thousands of lives. And Grace. Grace who had believed in him when nobody else did. Grace who had taught him that hope was worth fighting for. Grace who was somewhere in the darkness, waiting to find out if he would choose the mission over her. "What do we do?" Wolf asked. Ethan looked at the evidence on his desk, at the photos on his wall, at the movement he had built and the people who depended on it. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person who might be able to help. "Patricia, I need you to do something impossible." "I'm listening." "Find Grace Hawkins before dawn." "That's not impossible. That's insane." "Then be insane, because I'm not choosing between her and the mission. I'm going to save them both." How Ethan looked at Wolf, at the fear in the big man's eyes, at the desperation of a father who had already lost one woman he loved. "Get every chapter, every contact, every resource we have. Blanket this city. Someone saw something. Someone knows something. Find them. And if we can't find her in time," Ethan's jaw tightened, "then I walk into that hearing tomorrow and I burn the whole thing down. Every name, every secret, everything they're trying to protect. I'll make it so public, so devastating, that hurting Grace would only make it worse for them." "That's a hell of a gamble." "It's not a gamble. It's a promise," Ethan turned to Wolf. "They think they can break me by threatening the people I love. They're wrong. Breaking me just makes me more dangerous." Wolf stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Let's find my daughter." They found her at 4:47 a.m., a warehouse on the outskirts of Phoenix, 12 men guarding her. Private security contractors who had been paid very well to hold a teenage girl hostage until a congressional hearing was canceled. They hadn't counted on 93 Hells Angels surrounding the building. They hadn't counted on Marcus Reed, the double amputee, who could still shoot straighter than most able-bodied men, providing overwatch from a neighboring rooftop. They hadn't counted on Ethan Cole walking through the front door alone, unarmed, with nothing but his voice and his willingness to die. "You made a mistake," Ethan said to the man who seemed to be in charge. "You thought I would choose between my mission and my family. You thought wrong. We have orders. Your orders are worthless. In 9 hours, I'm going to testify before Congress. I'm going to name every person who signed off on this operation, every official who knew about it, every politician who looked the other way." Ethan stepped closer. "And when I'm done, there won't be a hole deep enough for any of you to hide in." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Ethan smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Outside this building, there are 93 men who would kill for me. Not because I asked them to, but because I helped their brothers when nobody else would. That's the difference between you and me. You have money, I have loyalty." The contractor's face flickered with uncertainty. "You can shoot me right now," Ethan continued. "You can kill the girl. You can burn this building down and disappear. But it won't matter, because the evidence is already in Senator Warren's hands. The testimony is already written. The machine is already running, and it doesn't need me anymore." "Then why are you here?" "Because Grace matters to me, because I don't leave family behind, and because I wanted you to see my face when your world collapsed." The contractor reached for his gun. Wolf came through this door behind Ethan, moving faster than a man his size had any right to move. The fight lasted 11 seconds. When it was over, 6 contractors were unconscious, 2 were restrained, and 4 had fled into the desert where bikers were already pursuing them. Grace was tied to a chair in a back room. Bruised but not broken, scared but not shattered. "You came," she whispered when Ethan cut her bonds. "I'll always come. You should have gone to Washington. The hearing can wait. You can't." Ethan helped her into her wheelchair. "Are you okay?" "I'm alive, because of you." Grace grabbed his hand. "Now go. Go to Washington. Finish what we started." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to. Dad will stay with me, but you—" She squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. "You're the only one who can do this, the only one they'll listen to. If you don't testify, everything we built falls apart." "Grace, go." Her voice was fierce, unbreakable. "Go be the hero I know you are. And when you're done, come back to me." Ethan looked at Wolf. The big man nodded once. "I've got her. Go save the world." Ethan kissed Grace's forehead. Then he ran. He made it to Washington with 2 hours to spare. The hearing room was packed. Senators, cameras, reporters, veterans who had traveled from across the country to watch this moment. Ethan sat at the witness table, his heart pounding, his hands steady. Senator Warren made the introduction. The cameras started rolling, and Ethan Cole, the mechanic who listened, began to speak. He spoke for 3 hours. He told them about Grace, about Thomas Bradley, about Samuel Torres and Maria Torres and Jennifer Okonkwo and all the veterans whose names he'd learned in the past 5 months. He told them about the corruption, the kickbacks, the falsified reports, the deaths that had been covered up and the lives that had been destroyed. He told them about Pete, the mechanic who had saved him when nobody else cared, about the promise he'd made to find another way to matter, about the crumbling garage in Arizona where hope had been rebuilt one wheelchair at a time. And he told them about the kidnapping, about the men who had taken Grace to stop him from speaking, about the desperation of people who would rather hurt a teenage girl than face accountability for their crimes. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Senator Warren spoke. "Mr. Cole, do you have any final words for this committee?" Ethan looked at the cameras, at the millions of people watching across the country, at the veterans in the gallery who had come to witness this moment. "I'm just a mechanic," he said, "and I fix things. That's what I do. But some things are too broken for one person to fix. Some things need everyone. They need politicians who actually care. They need officials who actually listen. They need a country that actually honors the promises it makes to the men and women who serve." He paused. Samuel Torres waited 18 years for equipment that worked. He died because nobody listened. Thomas Bradley tried to kill himself because nobody cared. Grace Hawkins was kidnapped because I dared to speak the truth. This is what happens when the system breaks. This is the cost of looking away. He stood up slowly, his bad leg protesting. "I don't want to be a hero. I just want to fix what's broken. But I can't do it alone. None of us can. So I'm asking you, not as a witness, but as a veteran, as a citizen, as a human being, help me. Help us. Help the people who serve this country and were forgotten by it." He looked directly into the nearest camera. "Because if we don't fix this now, more veterans will die. More families will suffer. More promises will be broken. And eventually there won't be anyone left who believes that America takes care of its own." The room erupted. Senators were shouting, reporters were typing, veterans in the gallery were standing applauding, some of them crying. Ethan walked out of the hearing room into a wall of cameras and microphones and questions he couldn't answer. But he didn't stop. He kept walking until he found a quiet corner, until he could pull out his phone and dial the only number that mattered. "Grace, I watched the whole thing." Her voice was thick with tears. "You were amazing. I was terrified." "Same thing." She laughed through her crying. "When are you coming home?" Ethan looked back at the chaos he'd created, at the movement that would continue with or without him, at the future that was suddenly unceasably full of hope. "Tonight," he said, "I'm coming home tonight." "Good, because we have work to do. More wheelchairs. More everything." Grace's voice steadied. "This is just the beginning, Ethan. What you did today, it changes everything. But change doesn't happen in hearing rooms. It happens in garages, in hospitals, in the lives of people nobody else sees." "I know. So come home, and let's finish what we started." Ethan smiled. It was the first real smile he'd felt in weeks. "On my way." He hung up the phone. Behind him, the world was changing. Ahead of him, the road led home. And somewhere in between, 95 Hells Angels were waiting to escort him back to Arizona, back to the garage, back to the work that would never be finished, back to the life he'd finally learned how to live. The flight home took 3 hours. Ethan spent every minute of it staring out the window at clouds that looked like cotton and a world that looked smaller than it had yesterday. His phone had died somewhere over Texas, probably for the best. The notifications had been coming so fast the screen couldn't keep up. Messages from veterans, messages from senators, messages from reporters who wanted interviews, and producers who wanted documentaries, and publishers who wanted books. He didn't want any of it. He just wanted to go home. The plane landed in Phoenix at 7:42 p.m. Ethan grabbed his bag, walked through the terminal, pushed through the doors into the Arizona evening, and stopped. 95 motorcycles lined the pickup zone. 95 Hells Angels stood beside them, and at the front of the formation, sitting in her wheelchair with the biggest smile Ethan had ever seen, was Grace. Took you long enough, she said. Traffic was hell. Funny. She rolled toward him. How does it feel? Being a national hero. Terrifying. He crouched down, took her hands. How are you? Really bruised, tired, angry? Her smile softened. But alive. Because of you. Because of all of us. Wolf appeared beside his daughter, his face still carrying the shadows of what had almost happened. But there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like peace. You did good today, Cole. I talked for 3 hours. That's not doing good. That's torture. You changed the world. That counts for something. Wolf extended his hand. Welcome home, brother. Ethan shook it. The word hit him harder than he expected. Brother, he'd spent so long alone, so long believing that the only family he had was the one. He'd lost his ex-wife, who left his father, who disappeared his army brothers, who died in the desert. He'd built walls around himself so thick, he'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But these people had torn down his walls anyway, not with force, with patience, with loyalty, with the simple, stubborn insistence that he mattered. Let's go home, Ethan said. The convoy rolled through Phoenix like a parade. Cars pulled over to watch. People on sidewalks stopped and stared. Someone started a live stream that would eventually get 3 million views. But Ethan didn't notice any of it. He was too busy watching Grace in the sidecar of Wolf's bike, her hair flying in the wind, her face lit with a joy that had been missing for so long. She caught him looking and grinned. What? Nothing, just thinking. About what? About how different everything is. 6 months ago, I was alone in a dying garage, wondering if my life would ever matter again. Now you're riding through Phoenix with 95 bikers who would die for you. Grace's grin widened. Quite an upgrade. I was going to say now I have a family, but sure the bikers are nice too. She laughed. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. The garage looked different when they arrived. Not physically. The paint was still peeling. The concrete was still cracked. The sign still read, Cole's Auto Repair. We fix what others can't. But the parking lot was full. Veterans and their families had set up chairs and tables. Someone had strung lights between the telephone poles. A barbecue was smoking in the corner, filling the air with the smell of hamburgers and hot dogs. What is this? Ethan asked. A party, Wolf said. You didn't think we'd let you come home without celebrating, did you? I don't need, shut up and enjoy it. Wolf clapped him on the shoulder. You saved my daughter. You saved Thomas Bradley. You exposed corruption that's been destroying veterans for decades. You testified before Congress and didn't flinch. Tonight we celebrate. Tomorrow we get back to work. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say that he was tired, that he needed sleep, that he wasn't comfortable being the center of attention. But then he saw the faces in the crowd. Marcus Reed standing on prosthetic legs that Ethan had adjusted 3 months ago. Thomas Bradley alive and smiling for the first time since that night in the Phoenix hospital. Jennifer Okonkwo surrounded by a group of female veterans she'd connected with through the network. George, the 91-year-old Korean War veteran, holding a beer and telling war stories to anyone who would listen. And dozens more. Veterans he'd helped. Families he'd touched. Lives that had been changed because one mechanic had decided to listen. Okay, Ethan said quietly. Let's celebrate. The party lasted until midnight. Ethan spent most of it in a corner of the garage talking to veterans who wanted to thank him, families who wanted to share their stories, mechanics who wanted to learn his methods. He shook hands until his arm ached. He listened until his ears rang. He accepted gratitude that he still didn't feel he deserved. But somewhere around 11 p.m., the crowd parted and Ethan's father walked through. He looked older than the last time Ethan had seen him, thinner, but his eyes were clear and his step was steady. Dad, son. They stood there for a moment, neither knowing what to say. 3 years of silence, a lifetime of misunderstanding, and now somehow a chance to start over. You came, Ethan finally said. I told you I would. I thought maybe you'd changed your mind. I almost did. Sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to convince myself I didn't belong here. His father smiled slightly. Then I realized that was the same excuse I'd been making for 30 years, and I was done making excuses. Dad, let me say something. His father stepped closer. I watched your testimony today, all 3 hours of it, And I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. What? You're not broken. You never were. His father's voice cracked. You're the best thing I ever did. The only thing I ever did that mattered. And I almost threw that away because I was too stupid and proud to see what was right in front of me. You weren't stupid. You were scared. Same thing sometimes. His father reached out, put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I'm proud of you, son. I should have said that years ago. I should have said it every day of your life. But I'm saying it now, and I mean it more than I've ever meant anything. Ethan felt tears burning in his eyes. I'm proud of you too, Dad. For what? For being here, for trying, for not giving up on us. His father pulled him into a hug. It was awkward. Neither of them were huggers, but it was real. And it healed something that had been broken for a very long time. Come on, his father said when they finally separated. I want to meet these biker friends of yours. They look terrifying. They are terrifying. They're also the best people I know. Then introduce me. Ethan led his father into the crowd where Wolf was waiting with a beer and a handshake and a story about the first time Ethan had stood up to 95 Hells Angels without flinching. The party ended, but the work didn't. Over the next 6 months, everything Ethan had built began to transform into something larger. The congressional hearing led to investigations. The investigations led to arrests. Hartwell was convicted of manslaughter and corruption. 17 other VA officials were removed from their positions. The equipment procurement system was overhauled from top to bottom. It wasn't perfect, systems never were, but it was better, and better was all Ethan had ever hoped for. The network continued to grow. Chapters in 23 states now ran satellite operations using Ethan's methods. Over 1,000 mechanics had been trained. Over 10,000 veterans had been helped. The VA reached out 3 months after the hearing, not to threaten, to negotiate. We want to hire you as a consultant, the administrator said. Her name was Dr. Rebecca Chen, and she'd been brought in specifically to clean up the mess the previous leadership had created. Your methods work. Your network reaches veterans we can't reach. We need your help. I don't want government money. Then what do you want? Ethan thought about it. About all the battles he'd fought, all the people he'd helped, all the things that still needed fixing. I want you to listen, he said. Actually listen. To the veterans, to the families, to the people who use the equipment you approve. Not just check boxes, not just follow protocols. Listen. That's a lot to ask of a bureaucracy. Then change the bureaucracy. That's what you're here for, isn't it? Dr. Chen smiled. It reminded him of Senator Warren's smile, sharp and real. Mr. Cole, I think we're going to get along very well. The consulting position came with conditions. Ethan would review equipment specifications. He would sit on procurement boards. He would train VA technicians in his methods. But he wouldn't stop working in his garage. And he wouldn't start charging veterans who couldn't pay. Dr. Chen agreed to everything. Some fights you win by compromising, she told him. And some fights you win by finding people who don't know how to compromise on the things that matter. Spring arrived with the Arizona wildflowers and a visitor Ethan hadn't expected. Her name was Sarah Martinez, 43 years old, blonde hair streaked with gray, eyes that looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep. Can I help you? Ethan asked. Maybe. She stood in the doorway of his garage, clutching her purse like a lifeline. My name is Sarah. I was Jake's wife. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Jake Martinez, the name on the fictional story that had spread across the internet. The name that had been confused with his own so many times that news outlets had started mixing up the details. The mechanic who didn't exist but whose story had somehow merged with Ethan's in the public consciousness. There is no Jake Martinez, Ethan said carefully. That's a fictional name from a story someone wrote. I know, but the story was based on my husband. Sarah's voice trembled. Jake died 3 years ago. Suicide. He was a veteran, a mechanic. He tried to help other veterans with their equipment, but the VA shut him down. He couldn't take it anymore. Ethan's chest tightened. I'm sorry. When I saw the news about you, I thought, she wiped her eyes. I thought maybe his dream didn't die with him. Maybe someone else picked it up and carried it forward. I didn't know your husband. I know, but you're doing what he wanted to do, what he tried to do before they broke him. Sarah stepped closer. I came here to thank you and to give you something. She pulled a worn notebook from her purse, handed it to Ethan. Jake's notes, everything he learned about wheelchair modifications and prosthetic adjustments before they made him stop. He never got to use them. But maybe you can. Ethan opened the notebook, page after page of detailed observations, measurements, techniques. The work of a man who had cared deeply and been crushed for caring. Why, Ethan asked. Why give this to me? Because Jake would have wanted you to have it. Because you're finishing what he started. Because, Sarah's voice broke. Because I need to know that he didn't die for nothing. That somewhere, somehow, his work continues. Ethan looked at the notebook, at the legacy of a man he had never met but somehow understood. I'll use it, he said. Every page. I promise. Oh, thank you, Sarah smiled through her tears. Thank you for giving his dream a second chance. She left without another word. Ethan sat in his garage for a long time reading Jake Martinez's notebook, learning from a ghost who had walked the same path years before. He wasn't the first, he wouldn't be the last, but for now he was the one who carried the torch. And he would carry it until he couldn't carry it anymore. Summer brought graduation season. Grace had finished her high school requirements through an accelerated program while working at the garage. Now MIT was waiting, a full scholarship, a future in biomedical engineering, a chance to design equipment that would help people like her for generations to come. The night before she left, she found Ethan alone in the garage working on a child's wheelchair that had arrived that morning. You should be at your party, Ethan said without looking up. So should you. I have work to do. You always have work to do. Grace rolled closer. That's not why you're hiding. Ethan set down his tools. I'm not hiding. You're avoiding, same thing. She reached out, touched his arm. Talk to me. He was quiet for a long moment. The garage was dark except for his work light. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the party music and laughter and the rumble of motorcycles. I don't know how to do this without you, he finally admitted. Do what? Any of it. You've been here since the beginning. You've been my partner, my conscience, my reminder of why this matters. He looked at her. When you leave, I'm afraid I'll forget. Forget what? That it's about people, not machines. That the work only matters if we see the humans behind the equipment. His voice dropped. You kept me human, Grace. I don't know who I am without that. Grace stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something she'd never done before. She stood up. Not fully, not steadily, but using her modified crutches, the ones Ethan had designed specifically for her body, she rose from her wheelchair and stood face to face with the man who had given her back her hope. You listened to me, Ethan Cole. Her voice was fierce. You were human before I met you. You were human when you fixed Mrs. Chen's brakes for $50. You were human when you stood in front of 95 bikers and didn't flinch. You were human when you chose to help veterans nobody else would help. She grabbed his face with both hands. I didn't make you human. You made me believe that humans could be good. You made me believe that someone would actually see me if I just held on long enough. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. And now I'm going to MIT to learn how to help other people the way you helped me. But I'm not leaving you. I'm carrying you with me. Everything you taught me, everything you showed me, it goes where I go. Grace, I'm not finished. She smiled through her tears. You don't need me to stay human. You just need to keep doing what you've always done. See people, listen to them, fix what's broken. And when you forget, because you will forget, everyone does look at that wall of photos and remember why you started. She let go of his face, sat back down in her wheelchair. Now come to my party. Dad's getting drunk and trying to give a speech. Someone needs to stop him before he embarrasses us both. Ethan laughed. It came out wet and broken, but it was real. Okay, let's go stop your father. That's better. Grace started rolling toward the door. Oh, and Ethan. Yeah, I love you. Not like a boyfriend, like a person who saved my life and became family without asking permission. She grinned. Just so you know. I love you too, Grace. Same way. Good. Now come on, we have a party to crash. They went to the party. Wolf's speech was terrible and perfect. The bikers cried. Grace pretended to be embarrassed but couldn't stop smiling. And Ethan stood in the middle of the chaos, surrounded by people who had become his family, and realized that he wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing Grace, not of the work continuing without him, not of anything, because she was right. He'd been human all along. He just needed someone to remind him. Grace left for MIT on a Tuesday morning. 95 motorcycles escorted her to the airport. Wolf sobbed like a baby but denied it later. Ethan watched her plane disappear into the clouds and felt something shift inside him. Not loss, something else. Pride. She would do amazing things. She would design equipment that would change lives. She would carry everything they'd built together into a future neither of them could see. And that was enough. That was more than enough. The ball brought new challenges. The VA's new procurement protocols required testing. Ethan spent weeks in government buildings arguing with bureaucrats who didn't understand why user experience mattered more than cost efficiency. He won some arguments, lost others, learned to compromise without compromising on the things that mattered most. Dar Chen became an ally, then a friend, then someone who actually understood why this work was important. "You're changing things," she told him one evening after a particularly brutal meeting about wheelchair specifications. Slowly, frustratingly slowly, but changing. Not fast enough. Change is never fast enough. That's why it takes people like you, people who don't give up when the system pushes back. "I'm tired." "I know. Everyone who does important work is tired." She smiled. "That's how you know it's important." The first anniversary of Ethan's congressional testimony fell on a Saturday. He didn't plan anything special. Just another day in the garage, another wheelchair to fix, another veteran to help. But the veterans planned something. They started arriving at dawn. Not just from Arizona, from California and Texas and Florida and New York. Veterans he'd helped over the past 18 months. Families whose lives had been changed. Mechanics he'd trained who had gone on to help thousands more. By noon, there were over 300 people in his parking lot. By evening, the number had doubled. They brought food and music and stories. They brought photos of equipment Ethan had modified and letters from veterans who couldn't make the trip. They brought a banner that read, "1 year of hope," and hung it from the garage rafters. And they brought something else, a plaque. Wolf presented it at sunset, standing in front of a crowd that had grown too large to count. "Ethan Cole." Wolf read, his voice carrying across the silence. "In recognition of 18 months of service, over 12,000 veterans helped, over 50 lives saved, over 23 states reached. This plaque is presented by the Veterans of America to the mechanic who listened when nobody else would." The crowd erupted in applause. Ethan stood frozen, the plaque in his hands, tears streaming down his face. "Speech," someone shouted. "Speech, speech, speech." He looked at the crowd, at the faces of people whose lives he'd touched, at Wolf and Marcus and Thomas and Jennifer, and all the others who had become his family. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I'm just a mechanic." Laughter rippled through the crowd, "But I have something to say." He took a breath. "When I started this, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a mission. I just had a garage and some tools and a whole lot of stubbornness. I thought I was broken. I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was to fade away quietly and not bother anyone." He paused. "I was wrong." The crowd went silent. "I learned something in the past 18 months. Something I wish I'd understood a long time ago." He looked at the plaque in his hands. "We're all broken. Every single one of us. We carry damage we didn't ask for, pain we can't explain, wounds that never fully heal." He looked up at the crowd. "But that's not the end of the story, because broken people can still help other broken people. Damaged hearts can still love. Wounded hands can still heal." His voice strengthened. "The question isn't whether we're broken, it's whether we're willing to let our brokenness become a bridge, a connection, a way to reach someone else who's drowning in the same darkness we once knew." He held up the plaque. "This belongs to all of you. Every veteran who trusted me with their equipment, every family who believed in what we were building, every mechanic who learned these methods and carried them forward, every biker who showed up when I needed them most." He looked at Wolf. "Every father who gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one." He looked at the sky where somewhere Grace was starting her new life. Every daughter who reminded me why this matters. He lowered the plaque. I'm not a hero. I never was. I'm just someone who learned that the best way to fix yourself is to fix someone else. That the best way to find meaning is to give it away. That the best way to survive is to help someone else survive. He smiled. So thank you for letting me help, for letting me listen, for letting me be part of something bigger than myself. He raised the plaque one more time. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. And I can't wait to see where we go from here. The applause was deafening. 2 years later, Ethan stood in the same garage looking at a wall that now held over 500 photos, 500 faces, 500 lives, 500 reasons to keep going. Grace was graduating from MIT in 3 months, top of her class, already recruited by 3 different medical equipment companies. She called every Sunday sometimes to talk about her research, sometimes just to hear his voice. Wolf had retired from the Hells Angels. Not completely, he still rode, still wore his cut, still commanded respect from brothers across the country. But he'd found a new mission running the nonprofit that had grown out of Ethan's garage. The Mechanic's Promise, they called it. Helping veterans one wheelchair at a time. Thomas Bradley had become a counselor. He worked with suicidal veterans, now using his own survival story to reach people nobody else could reach. He'd saved 11 lives in the past year. 11 people who were still breathing because someone who understood their darkness had shown them there was light. Marcus Reed was running the largest satellite operation in California. Over 100 mechanics. Over 2,000 veterans helped annually. A waiting list that stretched for months because word had spread that someone there actually listened. And Ethan was still in his garage, still fixing wheelchairs and prosthetics and walkers, still charging nothing to veterans who couldn't pay, still working until his hands cramped and his legs screamed and his eyes burned from exhaustion. Still doing what he'd always done, seeing people, listening to them, fixing what was broken. The door opened behind him. He didn't turn around. "We're closed," he said, "even for me." He turned. Grace stood in the doorway, not in her wheelchair, on her feet, using crutches she'd designed herself during her senior project at MIT. Crutches that fit her body so perfectly, they looked like extensions of her arms. "Surprise," she said, grinning. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Boston." "Graduated early, turned down the job offers, came home." "Why?" Grace walked toward him, slowly, steadily, each step a miracle that had taken 2 years of work and hope and refusal to give up. "Because this is where I belong." She stopped in front of him. "Because there's nothing those companies can teach me that I can't learn right here. Because the best equipment in the world doesn't mean anything if the people using it don't feel seen." "Grace, I'm not asking permission." She smiled. "I'm telling you, I'm staying. I'm working with you. I'm taking everything MIT taught me and applying it here in this garage with these veterans. The equipment companies can wait, or can't, I don't care." Her smile softened. "You taught me that the most important things in life can't be measured by salary or prestige or career advancement. You taught me that meaning comes from helping people who've been forgotten, from seeing the invisible, from listening when nobody else will." She reached out, took his hand. "I want to do that here, with you, for as long as I can." Ethan looked at her, at the young woman who had been invisible for so long, at the engineer who could have worked anywhere in the world but chose a crumbling garage in Arizona. "Your father's going to kill me. My father's going to cry and pretend he's not crying. Then he's going to throw a party that lasts 3 days. Probably. Definitely." Grace squeezed his hand. "So what do you say?" "Partners," Ethan looked at the wall of photos, at the 500 faces that represented everything he'd built, at the future that was standing in front of him, asking to be part of something that mattered. "Partners," he said. Grace hugged him. It was awkward. She was still learning to balance on her new crutches, but it was real. "Come on," she said when they separated. "We have work to do. There's a veteran outside who's been waiting 3 hours. His wheelchair is 30 years old and falling apart. He drove here from Minnesota." Minnesota. "He said he heard there was a mechanic in Arizona who actually listens." Grace grinned. "Let's not disappoint him." They walked to the door together. The veteran was waiting outside, an old man in a wheelchair that looked older than he was, his face worn by years and wars and waiting. "Mr. Cole," the old man asked. "That's me. I'm Henry Davis, Korean War. I've been fighting the VA for 40 years for equipment that works." He looked at the garage, at the photos on the wall, at the young woman standing beside Ethan. "Someone told me you might be able to help." Ethan smiled. "Tell me where it hurts, Henry." And Henry Davis told him, and Ethan Cole listened, because that's what he did. That's what he would always do, see people, hear them, fix what was broken, one veteran at a time, one wheelchair at a time, one life at a time, until there was no one left who needed fixing, or until he couldn't fix anymore, whichever came first. The sunset painted the Arizona sky golden orange. Inside the garage, tools clinked and voices murmured, and somewhere against all odds, hope was being rebuilt. Ethan Cole had spent his whole life believing he was broken. He wasn't. He was exactly what he was supposed to be. A mechanic who listened. A soldier who never stopped serving. A man who learned that the best repairs aren't about making something perfect. They're about making something human again. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the whole story. Not an ending. A beginning. Always a beginning. Because the best stories don't end. They just keep going. One fix at a time. One life at a time. One moment of connection at a time. Forever. If this story touched your heart, remember, you don't need a patch or a degree to make a difference. You just need to care enough to listen. Subscribe if you believe in everyday heroes. Comment, "Fix what's broken," if you stand with those who help when systems fail. And share this with someone who needs to remember that one person with skill and heart can change everything. The world needs more people who see suffering and refuse to look away. Be that person, starting now, starting today.